Preface and Chapter 1 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Preface. There is a Freemasonry among Klondikers which rules that no tales shall be told out of school. If, therefore, this were an historical novel, if I were telling tales and seeking to escape censure by the subterfuge of changing names, I could hardly succeed. Let me take the case of Pooh Bah, for instance. The reader with a knowledge of the early days of Dawson, accepting the story as historical, would fix as the original any one of half a dozen men indecently caricatured. But if he is told the character is a composite one, that it is the personification of Dawson graft, or, in other words, that it is the sum of a merger, he will understand, and, I think, make no complaint. Otherwise, the story may be accepted as the author's best effort to convey a true account of the different phases of the world's most remarkable stampede. The stories of corruption among the officials in Dawson are those which a visitor would have heard on every hand, and at the present time there are many old-timers in the Yukon who will tell tales similar to the incidents I have introduced in my story. When one of my characters speaks of the Dawson officials as petty larceny thieves and highway robbers, it is to be understood to be a sample of the phraseology in vogue at the time. The different types of prospector I have attempted to portray are those I have met, lived with, and mixed with. Should it appear I have given too much space to the humble economies of the miner's life, I shall advance as my excuse the lack of our literature in this particular. I have also made an humble attempt to establish the respectability of the miner. So much has been written to compromise him, and so many imaginations have drawn lurid pictures of his morals, I feel it his due. In a general way, the reader may accept anything in my story which has none other than an historical interest as being accurate. I am indebted to the Reverend Archdeacon MacDonald, now of Winnipeg, for the story of his first discovery of gold. For the story of the discovery of Franklin Gulch, I am indebted to Mr. William Hartz, who also furnished the accounts of the finding of gold in the Stewart River. These accounts have never before been written. W.H.P.J. Toronto, Canada, January 1913. End of preface. Chapter 1. The Fortune Seekers. Those who join the stampede to a new gold field may generally be divided into two classes, the tenderfoot and the old-timer, otherwise the novice and the experienced prospector. The novice joins the stampede because he catches the fever, dreams dreams. The old-timer goes because the diggings he had last worked in proved of little good. Were the sea dogs of old, Drake, Raleigh, or Frobisher, born into the world to-day, their spirit would surely have impelled them to the mining camp, to seek fortune in the mountain fastnesses, and to wager years of effort on the chance of wresting from Nature her treasure stores. On the steamship Aleutian, as she lay in the dock at Vancouver, British Columbia, one day in the March of 1898, there were many tenderfeet and a few old-timers. Amongst the experienced was John Berwick. About him surged the steamship's host of passengers, waving their arms and yelling answers to the cheer that went up from the great crowd upon the dockside. He and his fellows were bound for the Klondike goldfields. Before them lay adventures, toil, and danger. The adventurous will ever draw the tributes of goodwill from the multitude staying at home. The air was chill and damp, and the increased speed of the steamer as she passed from the harbour accentuated the effect of the breeze that blew against her, so that Berwick felt cold. He shivered and half turned towards the door across the promenade, but the wavelets, flying by in their half-blue, half-grey ripples, fascinated him, and he lingered. Suddenly he was aroused. A hand was on his shoulder, and he heard a familiar voice say, "Hullo, old chum!" John swung round. He looked into the smiling face of his old-time mining mate, George Bruce. "George, by all the gods!" he cried, "are you bound for the diggings too?" "Yes, and mighty glad to find an old mate. I told you when you left Coolgardie that you wouldn't stand civilization long, but had no idea of running across you in this rush." The two turned and entered the saloon together. Neither mentioned it, but each knew that in the adventures before them their efforts and their fortunes would be joined. In the language of the Australian they were mates, or in the vernacular of their new surroundings, partners. George Bruce was tall and athletic, with golden hair. He was a jovial soul, blessed with a body of activity. He would go for the hardest work in a cheery way, and during the social hours of evening was the best of company. He was as liberal with his money and means as he was of good nature. The saloon was crowded with men, drifting about, staring at all they met, or talking in groups. On the lower deck dogs could be heard barking. The ship was tense with an atmosphere of excitement. Berwick and his pardner went by a companion-way to the lower deck, where they found a passage-way to the forepart of the ship, and so came to the presence of the canine choir. Big dogs and little dogs, of every breed and colour, were there. All grades of canine society were represented, from the big and well-fed St. Bernard to the mongrel snared in the slums. Dogs were a safe investment in the towns on the Pacific coast of North America, and unscrupulous humanity was actively at work capturing them and getting them there. The portion of the deck to which the dogs were relegated was also set apart for the baggage, which was piled in heaps in the middle. A dozen men were diving into kit bags, extracting necessary articles, or packing them away. The inspiration of the last few minutes in Vancouver had prompted many to purchase odds and ends which had been forgotten in the general outfitting. A tall, angular man was attending to 3 dogs of an uncommon breed. 2 of them were practically of the same size, which was that of an ordinary collie. The third was not so large. All had the same markings, black with tan about the face and neck, and a show of tan about the legs; but the hair on the 2 larger was longer than on the third. This couple also had bushy tails which curled over their backs, while the tail of the smaller dog was only a stump. John recognized them from their wolfish look as belonging to a northern breed. George and he became interested. After watching the dogs for a minute, John approached one of them and patted him, remarking to his owner, "Your dogs don't seem over affectionate." "No." "They don't make much noise." "These dogs never bark." "Why is that?" "Don't know. Suppose it is because they have wolf in them. But they howl when the spirit moves them." "Often?" "Only when they are alone, and then generally at night." The conversation was lapsing when the stranger turned and gazed at the mountains showing through the mist along the coast. "Those mountains look kind of cold," said he. "You fellows going inside?" "Yes," answered John. "Come from Australia?" The stranger had evidently been sizing them up. "There are a lot going inside from Australia, I hear." "The only man I know on board is George Bruce here, my mate. But there is such a crowd about, there may be others." "The passes are already crowded. A whole lot of these fellows don't know what they are up against." The man shook his head with an aspect of melancholy. "Been in the Klondike before?" Berwick asked him. "Yes, 5 years ago. I came down from the river in '96, just before the news of Carmack's discovery reached 40 Mile, or else I would have been in on the best of it. The fellows sent me out word right after, but I didn't think the pay streak would hold, so didn't go in last year. But this spring I got so dead sick of civilization I just had to get away, although I don't think there's much chance of my striking it rich." "Your dogs are Yukon dogs?" "Yes, Malamoots. I brought them out with me just to kind of keep me from getting homesick, but they worked the other way. I took them back on the home ranch, and every time they set up a howl on winter nights I began to see the old northern lights sky shooting overhead, and to smell the bean pot boiling, and I'd feel like getting down a hole to bedrock somewhere and trying a pan of dirt. Besides, the folks outside, I don't like their ways. They ask a man so many fool questions. They all want to know why I ain't a millionaire. You see, I've been up to Bonanza Creek where Carmack made his discovery, and where the rich claims have been discovered, a dozen times. We used to call it Rabbit Creek, and there were always a half-dozen moose or so mooching round, and we used to go shooting then." "Didn't you ever try a dish of gravel?" asked George, for the first time entering the conversation. The stranger looked at him, and evidently did not understand. John cleared the situation by saying, "I think what you call a pan we call a dish in Australia." "Oh, yes, I've panned it often enough, but could not get more than a few colours to the pan of dirt. Fellows writing me say they go down through 20 feet of black muck before they strike the gravel and bedrock. I was not looking for any proposition like that. How Carmack found out the gold was underneath, I don't know." The two friends bade their new acquaintance good evening, and returned to the saloon. All the seats were occupied, and there were yet groups of men standing about, but the excitement was less. They passed on to the smoking room at the fore part of the ship. This was crowded, and the air thick. A large man in a white sweater was holding forth. He was stout almost to corpulency, and extended his fist excitedly in the ardour of his argument. "I tell you, gentlemen," he was saying, "I come from the state of Idaho. We have big mountains in Idaho, with lots of snow on them in winter. I've lived among these mountains for 20 years, and I know what snow is. And you bet your life if there is one man who will get into the Yukon, it is John Mugsley. Big Jack, they call me back home. It's a big man who is needed on a trip like this. A fellow who can put a couple of 100 pounds on his back and walk off with it as if it were nothing. I tell you, this is not a proposition for any tenderfoot to tackle." "Well," said another man, "I don't want any packing so far as I am concerned. I have 2 cows with me, both good milkers, and I will load my stuff on their backs and drive them over the pass. I can have their milk to drink, and when I get to Lake Bennett I'll kill them and sell their meat." John and George had seen those cows. Poor cows! Poor man! So it was with a large portion of the passengers. With the excitement and the thirst for gold, the most quixotic ideas had been developed. What the cows were to live upon en route had not yet been considered. Such is the haste with which an idea is acted upon when the gold fever has seized its victim. Others there were who had machine-propelled devices designed to travel over ice and snow, or on dry land. These machines were manufactured and sold by keen-witted salesmen to the inexperienced and confiding. After dinner, that first evening out of port, John and George fell into conversation with the owner of the Malamoots. They had seized 2 of the cots erected in the saloon, and their new friend, seeing them, had taken one next to them. His greeting was friendly. "Well, gentlemen, getting located?" "Yes." "Good act." The 3 were soon in deep conversation, discussing gold mining as prosecuted in Australia and in the Yukon. After an hour or 2 they strolled forward between the cots, stepping over sacks and bags and articles of clothing spread upon the floor. They passed several tables at which games of cards were being played. "The tin horns are getting down to business," remarked the stranger. "What are they playing?" asked George. "Black jack, the great game for the tenderfoot. It is so easily learned, so easy to cheat at, too, and these greenhorns will get robbed blind." "Their eyesight will be improved by the loss of their money," remarked John. "A fool never learns," said the stranger. They entered the smoking room, and found Mugsley still holding forth. "Gentlemen, you just watch me and see how soon I get over these here mountains. It's experience that counts in this kind of work." The man who had the cows, and he who was the proud possessor of the Klondike ice locomotive, were listening with some disdain; but the dozen other listeners were open-mouthed in envy and astonishment at wonderful Mugsley. The 3 passed out on deck. The wind was chill, a frizzle was in the air, and the waves, breaking in dull phosphorescence against the bow of the ship, looked sickly and uncanny through the blackness. "A dangerous coast. The insurance rate for ships travelling this route is 15%, remarked the stranger. John Mugsley was still shaking his fist vociferously in the faces of his listeners as the party returned from deck to seek their beds. "Good night, you fellows. Glad I met you. My name's Hugh Spencer," the stranger said, as he settled in his cot. "The same to you," answered the others. The freemasonry of the gold seeker holds throughout the world, and its handshake is honest. 3 gold seekers have been introduced to the reader in this chapter, and these pages will tell something of what befell them in what was probably the most spectacular gold rush in the history of the world. John Berwick, who is by way of being our hero, shall have a chapter to himself. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 2. John Berwick. Like most men whose success in life is largely the whim of fortune, John Berwick had for years accepted her rulings without protest, and regarded passing little incidents as signs of her influence. One night in the December preceding his setting out for the Klondike, he was lying in his bunk on Judas Creek, one of the innumerable streams in British Columbia in which colours of gold, otherwise prospects, could be found, reading a month-old newspaper that a trapper, who had passed the previous night with him, had brought from the settlement, and in its columns had found an item of news telling of the recent rich discoveries in the Yukon. He read the paragraph carefully again and again, striving to separate exaggeration from truth, and to satisfy himself that there was truth in it. By the camp stove sat Joe, the French Canadian whom he employed, smoking and gazing at the glow of the fire with stolid and witless eyes. He would sit thus for hours. To a man of Berwick's temperament he was a satisfactory companion. On the claim things had gone none too well. True, by great effort they had reached bedrock at 30 feet, and were beginning to cross-cut in search of a pay streak. There was certainly little gold in the gravel on the bedrock already uncovered, and the flow of water into the working was very great. Indeed, as much time was taken in keeping the shaft free of water as in all their other works combined. And up to 3 days previously rain had been incessant, though relief was apparently at hand, owing to the frost that had succeeded. The earth had hardened, Judas Creek was already flowing in less volume, and the boulders in the stream were becoming massed with ice. Berwick had been but a few months on Judas Creek, having essayed to try his fortune in Canada's most western province. Fortune meant much to him, for lack of it hindered his marriage with the one necessary girl, Alice Peel, the only daughter of Surgeon Major Peel. This was one cause of his presence on the frontier. Another was that he and his religion had fallen out years ago. His father had intended him for the Church, and here he was. "The creek is falling rapidly. We can hardly hear it now," remarked John. "Dat's so," was Joe's reply. He was laconic. John's thoughts went back to his prospects. Much of his small capital had gone into the works. Joe was not in love. He had no capital save his strength of body, and his religion was negligible. When first this French Canadian had arrived in British Columbia and started work in a sawmill, he had refused to work on Sunday, until the foreman told him that the devil never crossed the Rocky Mountains, which silenced his scruples. For sure, the Rocky Mountains were very high. "I think we should empty the shaft to morrow with 70 or 75 buckets." "I guess dat's so." Again Berwick relapsed into silence, and kept his mind on his many problems. Had he, or had he not, better throw up his Judas Creek claim, and strike out for the scene whence came these wonderful tales? The volume of the creek was diminishing with abnormal rapidity. For 3 days now frost had been upon the canyon, and the flying spray had frozen upon the boulders. The rushing, gurgling stream, falling over rocks and sunken logs, had during that time been sucking down bubbles of cold air, which sealed the fine ice particles to the river bed. For miles Judas Creek was lined with anchor ice, encasing the rocks with a coating, sickly, white, insidious. In the darkness the opaque ice seemed to shine out in phosphorescence. In fact, it threw back the light of the stars overhead, which seemed to have lowered themselves in the heavens, so bright and grand were they. At a point a mile below the little pool, where the nucleus of the mass now filling the river bed had formed, a tree was stretched across the torrent. It had fallen into the stream above, and floated down until it jammed, holding back the current. The avalanche, as the thickening stream had now become, found this tree, and swept against it but a second, when it snapped. Now the flow of the river became a seething mass of ice and sticks 4 feet high, travelling at the rate of several miles an hour, picking up all that came in its way. It passed the mouth of several tributaries, which lent it increase of force. Still its speed quickened. The grinding noise increased. Logs, sticks, masses of ice, and great roots of trees appeared for an instant on its surface and sank again. Now the wave was 5 feet. Now 6 feet high, broadening out, gaining yet in speed, still more effectually holding back the river's flow. The gradual silencing of the river's roar was getting on the nerves of John Berwick, who was miles downstream, far below the ice flow. The river had tapered into a little rill. When a certain noise has been a companion for days and days, and is suddenly stilled, a sense of uneasiness results, as when on a steamer the throb of the engine ceasing will rouse sleepers from their slumber. The slowing down of the torrent in Judas Creek made Berwick restless. He did not at first recognize what it was that worried him. Joe also seemed as if he were not altogether proof against the spell. At last he took his stare from the stove and looked around the cabin. "I think something pretty soon happen, by gosh." John stared at him. For Joe to volunteer a remark was unusual. It increased his employer's apprehension. Berwick returned to his newspaper, fascinated by its news. A party of miners had arrived in San Francisco, bringing much gold from some unknown region of the north. They called it the Klondike. Would his Judas Creek claim ever pay him for his efforts? What were his chances of fortune? Masses of gold or mountains of dust? He was in search of fortune, with a big F. His thoughts naturally drifted to the girl he wanted to marry. She was the daughter of luxury and wealth. He was just a prospector, no more in the eyes of Dame Fortune than the sturdy natural by the stove. In fact, experience had led him to believe that in the mining enterprise Fortune had a partiality for such men as Joe. Berwick had been 5 years at the mining game. He had drifted from one camp to another, over America, to Australia, back to America. He had possibly become something of a cynic. Certainly his mind had hardened with his muscles. He dreamed dreams. What would his lady say if she received a letter saying he was again pulling stakes, and had left Judas Creek in order to avoid being defeated? He whistled and shrugged his strong shoulders. He did not know. He put some practical thoughts together. The Klondike was evidently in the north, far inland in Canada. Could he withstand great cold? Yes, he could. He could endure and do anything as any other normal strong man could, and could go anywhere that was practicable to humanity. This was not vanity, not conceit, but just healthy self-confidence. Should he pull up stakes and leave his Judas Creek claim to the coyotes? As this question once more came to his mind, he was aware of the complete silence now outside, and, letting his paper fall, bent his head to listen. Joe was listening also. Judas Creek was absolutely still. Joe arose and opened the cabin door. His employer joined him there. There was no sound from the creek. There was no creek. "By gosh, that's funny thing!" Joe exclaimed. "I certainly do not know how to account for it," said Berwick. He felt apprehensive. They returned from the cabin door. Joe going to his seat by the stove, Berwick putting his bed in order for the night, when Joe jumped up and ran to the door again. A dull, distant roar was heard. By gosh, I got it! It's a river snowslide what's coming. Quick, boss, quick! Get the hell out of this! Pretty soon no more cabin, no windlass, no bucket, only water, no nothing, all gone!" The man began hurriedly putting on his boots, and instinctively his master followed his example, inquiring as he did so, "What's that?" "He's a river snowslide, that's all I know for to call him. A avalanche on wheels, all turn over. Him carry away everything, bridge, tree, dam, all sort of thing, everything go." And as the sullen roar coming from the valley continued to increase, the appreciation of approaching danger spread from the one to the other. Berwick made haste and scrambled into his winter garb. Joe bundled together his personal effects, and some of the more valuable of the supplies in the cabin. Berwick did the same. Out of the door they sprang into the night, and up the hillside under which their cabin was built. Joe gave a sign when he considered they were out of danger. At once they threw down their loads and rushed back to the cabin. Grabbing another load, they again sought the higher ground. Meanwhile the flood had broken from the canyon at the head of their little valley. The timber there had been largely cut, and over the rugged stumps the rolling mass spread, grinding, tearing up the weaker roots. Berwick and his companion sat and watched their home going to destruction. Deliberately, it seemed, the mass of ice and water fell upon their workings. There was a loud crack as the windlass went down, and then the fury of water poured into their shaft. It was but for an instant. The flood tore against their cabin. Would the cabin endure the shock? The answer soon came. There was a rending of timber. The cabin was pushed before the ice, and then it seemed to melt away, swallowed up by the flood. The lights went out. Lower and lower it sank, till the roof was touched by the surging ice. Then that, too, went under, and nothing but a fractured log or pole was left of the little home. John shivered. The flood fell almost as quickly as it had risen, now that its work was proved effectual. Berwick turned to look at his man. Joe was already hard at work with an axe on a fallen tree, from which the chips flew. There was no doubt about it now. The Judas Creek venture was a failure. He could write it down as such. He had known many miners on whom fortune had smiled, drunken swine, many of them, to whom money appealed only as a means to dissipation. And he, to whom money, the price of his future home happiness, meant so much. Joe struck a match, applied it to a handful of birch bark, and the flame sprang up. By all the canons of his life, Berwick should have jumped into the fray and helped Joe make their camp. But after all, it was only a little past 9 o'clock. Yes, now he must throw up Judas Creek. Joe laid twigs on top of the birch bark and soon had a fire, to which he added larger sticks and logs. Then he cut down a fir tree and made a bed, over which he spread the canvas of a tent and blankets. The night was perfectly clear. They would be warm and snug enough beside the fire. Joe cut several more logs of wood and piled them near, after which he sat down upon the blankets, took off his boots and coat, rolled this into a pillow, and soon was asleep. Berwick, sitting by the fire, watched far into the night. His fancy played about the flames, calling up scenes of his youth, and conceiving all manner of pictures of the miner's life in the subarctic Klondike that was to be. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 3 The Beginning of Yukon. No more wonderful system of navigation probably exists on the globe than that of the inland passage between Puget Sound and the Lynn Canal, at the head of which are the towns of Skagway and Dia, the respective ports of the White and the Chilkoot Passes. For 10 miles the steamers plying along this route run behind the Great Barrier of Islands, beginning with that of Vancouver and ending at Point Deception. In summer the trip is grand beyond compare. In winter it is full of gloom and awe. As the ship travels northward, the mountains grow greater, the narrow passages narrower, till they develop as canyons, cut only by other canyon-like passages to the sea, or by glacier-ridden valleys from the mainland, whose mighty burdens shimmer in the sunlight as they yield in torrents tributes to the parent ocean. In summer continuous light reigns in the latitude of Skagway, and the traveller entering this weird zone is moved by its uncanny beauty. Winter was still on the land as the Aleutian ploughed her way northward, and the passengers saw the great walls of rock uplifting to the clammy mantle of low-lying clouds. Here and there Indian villages were passed, and Indian graveyards, with flags flying from the stagings raised 6 or 8 feet from the ground, on which reposed the deceased. The ship called at Wrangell and unloaded freight and passengers. "This town had a boom during the excitement of the Cassiar 20 years back," remarked Hugh Spencer to Berwick and Bruce, as the three stood on the deck and watched the bustle between the steamer and the wharf. "Let's stretch our legs up the quay," said George. They went ashore. Squaws were sitting with baskets of their handiwork before them, doing a lively trade with the disembarked passengers. The sails made were mostly of moccasins in beads, and bark canoes adorned with porcupine quills of brightest colours. Hugh stopped before an old squaw and picked up a pair of large mittens with gauntlet attachments. They were made of canvas and lined with red flannel. "How much?" he inquired. "$2 bits." "Give you 6 bits." "All right." "Better take a couple of pair each, fellows. There's nothing like them for the trail. Look how big the thumbs are." So Hugh and his 2 companions bought the whole of the squaw's store. "There's nobody knows how to make mitts for real cold weather like the Siwash. They make the thumbs good and big, so as not to stop circulation. And we'll have some cold weather yet before we get over the summit. But you have to beat the beggars down, as they always ask twice as much as they expect to get. Here we paid only 75 cents a pair for these mitts, and the squaw said she wanted $1.25 for them." "Are these Siwash Indians?" inquired John. Well, we call them Siwashes, but they don't like it. The real Siwash lives farther south, and the name, I believe, is one of contempt." "They are different Indians from any I have seen on the plain," said John. "Oh, yes, very different. I guess their only resemblance is that they are both good only when they are dead." "You're pretty hard on them," was the remark of the good-natured John. "Perhaps I am. You see, a tough outfit has been trading up here for years from down the coast, and before that the Russians were here, and they didn't put in most of their time building churches. They found $1 worth of hooch would get more from the savages than $1 worth of anything else, so they used whiskey. The savage, when you find him without the cussedness taught by the white man, makes a pretty good citizen. He may be lazy, but he is honest; and perhaps his laziness is only due to the fact that he has always had a klootch to do chores around, and has never been trained to the white man's ways of working. But let any fellow try following an Indian on snowshoes for a couple of days, and his ideas soon change. He's not much good with a pick and shovel, for sure, but he is A1 on the trail. Another thing about the Indian is that when one has grub, they all have grub. This is the way of the Stick Indians inside, and you can cache your grub in their country or leave the things lying around, and they won't touch them. During the rest of the day John and his mates were in the company of Hugh Spencer, listening to his tales of Yukon life. The glories of the summer there, and the great cold of the winter, with the resources of the miners to keep from despair. He told them the traditions of the camps, and how the discoveries of '49 in California had been followed by others in Oregon, British Columbia, the Fort Steele district, or Wild Horse Creek, Kettle River, Caribou, and finally in the Yukon. It wasn't a miner who was the first finder of gold in the Yukon, it was a missionary; but the missionary did not follow up this discovery, which makes a difference. However, I'll tell you the story, and it will let you see a little of Siwash nature in the telling of it. The Reverend Robert Macdonald, Doctor of Divinity and Archdeacon of Mackenzie River, was the first white man to find gold in the Yukon. Say, I ain't got much use for missionaries as a general proposition, but Archdeacon Macdonald is as white a man as ever lived, though he is east of the Rocky Mountains now. I guess the reason I don't like missionaries is that you can never do anything with the Siwashes once a missionary gets hold of them. Well, the Archdeacon— he wasn't Archdeacon then, though— drifted down the Porcupine, and took up his residence with the Hudson Bay Company people at Fort Yukon in the year 1862, which was a few years before I was born. You see, the Hudson Bay people established themselves at Fort Yukon in 1847. In 1842 Mr. J. Bell, in charge of the Hudson Bay post on the Peel River, which runs into the Mackenzie, from behind the divide from the headwaters of the Porcupine, crossed over and went down the Porcupine away. In 1846 he followed it to its mouth and saw the Yukon. In the following year Mr. A. H. Murray built Fort Yukon and set up business. Well, it was here that the Archdeacon started to tell the savages of the Great Spirit, and they were mighty interested. The savages had some sort of a tradition that a certain canyon, which opened into the Yukon a short distance upstream from the fort, was the home of bad spirits. They could hear them groaning, and they asked the missionary to put them wise. So, when a bunch arrived one day in July 1863, he trotted the whole outfit off to the canyon. Of course, the missionary found the noises were caused by the wind, or nothing, but, as the Siwashes said there were noises up the creek, he said it was the wind. Walking along the shore, the Archdeacon saw a bit of something shining in the gravel, and picked it up. It was a flake of gold sticking to a piece of mica, of which there's lots in the Klondike country. Mica schist, the scientists call it. So this was the first find of gold by a white man, but the company was not looking for gold hunters in their country, so the discovery was never followed up. The Siwash is A1 at asking questions, just about as bad as a 6-year-old kid, and if a medicine man comes among them, it is surprising what sort of conundrums they will bring him. In this way John Berwick and his old-time mining mate pleasantly passed the hours, listening to the conversation of Spencer, by whom they were attracted. On the third evening, at dinner, the three being seated together, they noticed some movement beginning amongst those of the company who were seated near the companion-way. Several were seen to rise and hurry away. Quickly the excitement spread. The saloon was soon empty of most of its feasters. "Keep your seats, fellows. It's only some chechacho got a toothache," said Hugh. Shouts were heard, with a trampling and rush of feet on the upper deck. The only thing that could happen, outside of fire, would be to run ashore or hit an iceberg. We are hardly far enough north for the icebergs yet. Besides, if we had hit one or run ashore, we should know it. If we caught fire, it would not be far to the shore anywhere along this route, and it is always well not to get stampeded in any case. After dinner the friends entered the main saloon, and found groups of men talking excitedly, with others returning from the upper deck where the lifeboats were stored. To the upper deck they went, and there they found Mr. Muggsley. "I tell you, gentlemen, no officer or anybody else is going to keep me from the lifeboats when a ship is sinking. I don't care for anybody. You stand by and let the officers and sailors run things, and they will fill the boats with women and their own friends, and look out for themselves. But I look out for John Muggsley. Big John Muggsley, the boys call me, and it's a case like this that makes me glad I'm big and strong." An excitable coal heaver had found a stream of water entering by a sea cock which had been left open through carelessness, and running up through the saloon to the boats had started the excitement. Such trivial circumstances often cause most disastrous panics, and likewise tell tales of how certain men are made. The ship eventually, after blinding snowstorms, entered Gastineau Channel. To the left was the great line of stamp mills pounding out the wealth of the mighty Treadwell quartz deposits on Douglas Island. To the right was the pioneer town of Juneau, with its gambling halls and saloons, enjoying the licence of the Alaska mining camp. The next stop for the ship was Skagway, where the sea journey would end on the morrow. The passengers were alert and astir. From then on it was to be a struggle. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 4 Society in Alaska. The weather had changed during the night, and as the two friends stepped on deck the following morning, a chill and cutting wind met them from the north. Away above them towered the mountains, their peaks dazzling white against the sky. Behind them, to the south, was the Lynn Canal, walled with mountains. Before them were mountains, and yet more mountains. The cluster of tents and hastily constructed buildings, resting on a few square miles of gravel flats, comprising the town of Skagway, were robbed of any importance by the great uplifting walls of rock. As they stood, a voice hailed them. "Is this Skagway?" It was Mr. Muggsley who spoke. "I fancy so," said John. "Better ask the purser. Here he comes." "Do we have to climb those mountains to get to the Klondike?" "Yes." "But where is the White Pass?" "There." The purser pointed to the mouth of a valley, which soon appeared blocked by a mighty mountain. "And that is the White Pass?" "It is." "Say, purser, is that berth I had taken for the trip down again? If not, save it for me. I guess I'm wanted back in Idaho." Mr. Muggsley, the big man, the strong man, Big Jack, as his friends called him, was suddenly possessed of cold feet. The great uplifting mountains, with their glittering peaks flung to heaven, had quickened the cowardice of his craven soul. Berwick and his comrade struggled ashore through the rushing freight handlers and piled up supplies. The freight which came from the Canadian port, Vancouver, had to be passed by the United States Customs, and the officers seemed few. There was a method of overcoming the customs by employing a convoy, an official of the United States Customs, to escort the goods across the narrow strip into Canadian territory again. John made inquiries, and addressed a fellow in a wild garb, bespeaking a resident. "Pay the duty, partner. These escort fellows are a bunch of grafters. They ain't no credit to the United States, I can tell you. Yes, pay duty, and hand an officer a $10 bill on the side, or they'll keep you here a week, you bet." John decided to pay the duty. The convoy would cost $5 per day and expenses. He made an effort to get his goods passed, but with no success, till he paid the $10 bribe. George did the same. John did not like bribery, but what else could he do? It was afternoon ere they got through, and as they gained the town, a rough board building with a great white cloth sign painted on it, "Restaurant, meals 50 cents," met their gaze from the head of the wharf. Other buildings of similar character composed generally this section of the town, so they walked into the first. It was a box of a place, as unfinished internally as externally. A dozen or so men, perched on high stools, were leaning against a board counter covered with white oilcloth. Behind the counter stood a woman and a girl, a range, where the chef was operating, at their back. A board partition divided off a sleeping apartment. The curtain that gave the room privacy was but half drawn. Articles of clothing, trunks and boxes, were strewn in disorder on the floor. "Soup?" queried the lady, as they took their seats. The cook filled 2 flat tin plates with a watery solution of tomatoes and rice. This they attacked. When the soup was finished, 2 other tin plates were handed them, laden with cubical chunks of beef and gravy. Dishes of potatoes and boiled beans, with bread and butter in tin bowls, were lined upon the counter for each man to help himself from. At the end of the second course, a plate, bearing a quarter section of sickly-looking apple pie, was slid over to each. The old lady presiding wore the smile of prosperity, and looked communicative, so John opened conversation. "Been in Skagway long?" "Just a month." "Doing well?" "Sure thing. Feed about 300 people a day. Don't care if the rush never lets up." "You've got a gold mine here without the trouble of going to Dawson." "Sure. That is, if Soapy don't put the whole town out of business. He makes the saloons and gambling halls pay him royalty now, besides running shows himself. And I guess he'll be after us soon, to make us ante up too." "I thought Alaska was a prohibition territory. No whiskey sold here." "Yes, that's what they say back east. But when you get uptown you'll find every second place a saloon with all the hooch you want to drink or have money to pay for." "But how do they get the whiskey?" "Oh, that's easy enough. The hooch is consigned through to the Canadian side in bond, but when it is landed here they drill a hole in the barrel and take out the whiskey. They refill the barrel with water, and it is packed over the summit." "But it costs 30 cents a pound to put the water over the summit." "That don't matter, with whiskey 50 cents a glass over the bar." "Don't the officers know this is going on?" "Sure thing they do, but they stand in." "There is no graft like a whiskey graft." Stand in and graft. The 2 Australians felt they knew the meaning of the terms, but they had yet to grasp how deep the meaning of standing in and grafting, as understood by officialdom in Alaska and the Yukon, could be. Berwick and his friend ate their pie, and departed to see the sights. The main street of the town ran due north and south, and was lined with tents and buildings, finished and under construction. The street was devoid of snow, except in patches here and there, the ever persistent wind from the north having generally swept the gravel clean. Sleighs, drawn by dogs or horses, passed smoothly over the ice, but shrieked in protest against the stone. Dogs and horses seemed everywhere in that rush of 50,000 men. No man could enter the Yukon without a year's provisions, which meant that he must transport at least 1,000 pounds in every case. Along the streets vehicles were waiting to transport vast stores of supplies to White Pass City, 12 miles distant. After which dog teams alone, or pack animals, or the labour of the human animal, were necessary. Some pack horses, mules, and burros were passing down the streets to their stables, after having carried up their loads. Men in outlandish garb were walking about. Many wore what appeared to be nightshirts coming down to their knees, with hoods attached, and rings of fur around the wrists and the face of the hood. Some of the peculiar garments were made of blue drill, others even of bed ticking, showing its dingy stripes. This garment was the parka. Berwick and Bruce entered the Pack Train Saloon and Gambling Hall, and met there the leaders of Alaska society, men and women of diverse morals and immoralities. In the great grab bag system of the goldfields every man has an equal chance, and on the frontier custom affords but one field of diversion, which each may enjoy to the full extent of his purse and inclination. As muscle and endurance alone give eminence on the trail, so only money and extravagance command attention in the bar room and at the gaming table; and it is there that the illiterate squander their money over the bars and tables, finding pleasure in the open-mouthed admiration of the yokel as well as in the stimulation of the liquor or the excitement of the play. At the bar of the pack train stood a row of men, in widest diversity of costume, talking together and to women numbered among the fallen. Behind the bar were the roulette wheel, the faro, the black-jack tables, and the crap game. A large percentage of these men were actively engaged in putting supplies over the passes, and were now squandering at the tables the money received in payment of that work. The thought struck John that probably not a man of them wasting his money there but had some one dependent to whom that money would be as a gift from heaven. Alas for the recklessness of frontier life, where it so often happens that men regard a show of contempt for money as tantamount to personal eminence. Such scenes were not new to him. On the plains in his apprenticeship he had seen a cowboy shoot his revolver through a bar mirror, and cheerfully pay the exorbitant recompense demanded by the proprietor. and in Sydney he had watched a drunken sailor place a 5-pound note between 2 slices of bread, and eat it. Such scenes as this in the mushroom Alaska town may be ever interesting to the students of human nature. They are also intensely pitiable, as Berwick found. What sight is sadder than that which shows man degraded or woman fallen? Man, the noblest being in all creation, upbuilt, evolved through the ages, practically perfect in his parts, his body complex yet true, delicate and confident, enriched with a mind capable of holding dominion, and conscious of the inspiration of his Creator. To see him, mind and body, lost to dissipation, drawn from hope, truth, and love, fallen into the mire, is truly sadder than death. From the Pack Train saloon the two friends visited several shops, and, notwithstanding the crowds therein, succeeded in adding to their supplies such necessities as were recommended by Hugh Spencer. Their purchases completed, they turned before the wind and went back to the restaurant. The air had taken on a greater chill, the mountain peaks shone with sunset gold. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 5. Soapy's Little Game. Soapy Smith was a criminal, with a long record of robbery and murder. In early life he had been a common faker, and sold soap, hence his sobriquet. His process consisted of wrapping small bits of laundry soap in paper, and including, or appearing to include, with several of the pieces a bank bill of varying value. Then he would mix all the pieces together, and, picking a handful out of the mass, auction them. Needless to say, every successful purchaser was a confederate. In the mining camps of the Western States he later took more radical methods, making many enemies and some friends. When he and his gang wished to exterminate an enemy, they would hunt him out in some saloon, gather about him, and play at fighting among themselves. Revolvers would be drawn and shots fired. The man "wanted" would be killed. It would be somewhat hard to find the actual man who fired the fatal shot, and in any case a subservient jury would bring in a verdict of accidental death. The community that grew at the head of the Lynn Canal in the spring of 1898 was a complete hotbed for crime. There Soapy Smith established himself, and law and justice ceased to exist. Gold seekers were enticed into games, and fleeced or openly robbed in the streets. Every saloon was owned by the desperado, or paid him tribute, and he drew revenue from every gambling table. Soapy Smith was the boss of these evil conditions. He was styled Colonel, and spoken of as a candidate for Congress. A body of United States regulars were stationed at Skagway, but did nothing. The Deputy United States Marshal would make promises, but take no action. The second evening after the arrival of our party in Skagway the sky was overcast, and through the night a storm arose. So they stayed within doors all the next day. But towards night inaction told them on, likewise lack of fresh air. They became restless after their evening meal, and George finally said, "Let us go out," and they went. George did not say where, nor did John ask. There was only one place to go to, and that was a saloon and gambling hall. One was much the same as the other. Every saloon was a gambling hall, every gambling hall a saloon. On the next night, in the vicinity of Skagway's 6th Avenue, they wandered into a saloon which had no sign. The question of what its name was did not cross their minds. The air was foul, and floor space not too plentiful. Women stared at them and passed them up. Not so the men. They moved on to the gaming tables. John threw a coin onto the black-jack table. To his surprise he won. He speculated again. Again he won. Then he remembered the old dodge of letting the novice win a bit at first, so he decided he would keep on until he found himself losing. When he had won $20, he put the money into his pocket, and went on with George to watch a man playing for heavy stakes at roulette. At this table there was never a word spoken, and the gold pieces passed from banker to player, from player to banker, without comment. While the two were looking on, they noticed a man come and stand by the banker, watch the game for a little while, glance shrewdly at them, and go away. Shortly afterwards another man did the same. John and George realized this attention, but said nothing. A third man came along, and bluntly asked them, Ever play roulette?" "No. At least not often," said John. "Good game." "Yes." "Ever shoot craps?" "No." "There's a table down at the end of the hall. Care to see it?" They followed their entertainer to the dimly lighted rear, where several men were leaning over a table throwing dice. They watched the game a bit, and found it uninteresting. They turned to go, when their new acquaintance made a move to follow, and asked in a hesitating way, "Have a drink?" George declined. The fellow pondered a bit, and then said in an ingratiating way, "Would you fellows like to see a big mountain goat I bought from the Siwashes to day?" John and George followed the man through a doorway into a cold room where a few candles were burning on a rough table. On the floor lay an immense mountain goat. "My word!" said George, "what a beauty!" They stood for some minutes surveying the dead monarch of the mountain crests, their entertainer taking one of the candles and holding it at the animal's head. Suddenly they heard groans, which appeared to come through the doorway at the opposite end of the room. "What's that?" The man took a candle and walked to the door, bending his head as if listening intently. The groans were continued. John and George went over to him. He held the candle in his left hand, and appeared to haul at the door with his right. "Oh! Oh!" came from the room in tones of deepest distress. The fellow handed the candle to John, and then, catching the door with both hands, gave it a mighty wrench. The heavy plank door opened, and showed a dark cavity, which drank up the slender light of the candle so effectually that they could distinguish nothing. Cautiously John entered, followed by George. The door was slammed. They were trapped. "We're caught! Soapy has us!" exclaimed George. John turned, shaded the candle with his hand, and explored the room. It was not large, and it took him but a minute to make a circuit of the four walls. "We're caught," was said again. "But there is no one here. Where did the groans come from?" asked John. "Don't know. If they weren't ventriloquism," replied George. That seemed likely. John ran and gave the door a kick. It was solid as a wall. "What will they do with us?" he asked. "Freeze us to death. We'll freeze quick enough in this atmosphere." The place was cold, clammy, benumbing. The walls were log, the floor of earth, sparkling with frost crystals. The roof was built of poles. There was no window. Here and there, where the crevices of the logs had not been thoroughly filled, and the air came in, there were patches of frost. They searched for some implement. The room was thoroughly bare. There was not even a billet of wood, let alone an axe or saw. Things were at a pass. They were both to perish in horrible death. The cold was seizing them. They stamped up and down the room and shouted. There could be, no answer. Frenzy came over them. Trapped, to perish of bitter cold. Horrible! Horrible! To famish as caged animals. They saw their little destiny, to walk and walk and walk, and then to lie down and sleep till death, the reality, came. Their impotency galled them. How weak were their arms and strength against these walls of logs! They marched about for an hour or more, encouraging each other as brave men will. Then cries were heard faintly from the outside, and new noises, which grew, and continued to grow. A great blow shook the wall, and then another. John shouted, George shouted, the blows were repeated, then they heard voices, and shouted again. The door was burst open, and in rushed a number of men. "Come, fellows, out of this, or you'll be cooked!" It was the voice of Hugh. They eagerly followed him through the room where the goat was, and out through a side door into the open, where a great glare met them. An outhouse was on fire. Men were rushing about and shouting. But Hugh kept on through the crowd, and the rescued followed him till they reached the safety of the street. "Now we'd better duck for home," said Spencer. "I go with you." And through the storm they struggled till they reached the Frau's restaurant. She had not yet retired, so they called for supper. Tea, bacon, and beans. After they had settled down, Hugh told his story. "You see, fellows, after I landed, I went over to the Chilkoot to have a look at things there. But after talking to the fellows, I reckoned that the White Pass was best for me, so back I comes. I was in the hall to-night with you fellows, but you did not see me, and I thought I would just lay back and see if you would hit the games. Then I kind of got a notion Soapy's men were watching you, so I thought I would watch the whole outfit. And then I see you go into the room with your bunco man, and then I don't see you come out, so I said to myself, you are there for keeps. Now there was with me one fellow I could rely on, so I asked him to keep an eye on that door, and I got out on the street to size up the building. I see towards the rear, the wing you went into, so I walks down there, sizing things up. Round on the back side I see a door and a window, but the door had the snow piled up against it. Besides, I knew they would not lock you in a room with a window in it, as you could easily kick that out. Then I looks at the walls, and I see by the end of the logs sticking out that there was a room which had neither window nor door to the outside, and I said, 'That's the cage.' So I ran back to the saloon and asked my friend there if anybody had come out, and he said no. I came to the conclusion that I would make a bluff of going in at the door you came out of. It was no good. A fellow stopped me and said, 'This room is private.' This made me sure you were still there. So I commenced figuring out how I could get you free, and I thought hard. The thing was to get a crowd together, and as a dog fight is no good in Skagway in the middle of the night, especially in a snowstorm, I said to myself, 'Fire!' I remembered a building I took for a woodshed lying near your skookum house, so I just hunted it up, and after finding there was a lot of wood in it with some hay, I set a match to it, and got out, taking an axe with me. In 5 minutes it was going fine, and I yelled, 'Fire, fire, fire!' Then it was all easy. I struck the logs with the axe, and yelled there was somebody in there who would get burned. I busted in the door to the outer room, and then the one into where you were locked up, the other fellows following. I don't know what the other fellows around the fire will think you were doing in there, but I guess they won't ask any questions. Fellows don't ask questions in Soapy's town. Doesn't do them much good if they do." John and George expressed their gratitude very simply. "I am going in over the White Pass," he continued, "and I figure, as us fellows can't keep clear of each other, that we'd better join forces." "Done!" cried George. "A good idea," said John. So it was agreed. In the morning details were talked over, and business was arranged. Additional purchases were made, including 2 more dogs, thereupon named Tom and Jerry. Hugh induced his friends to part with much of their bedding, saying he had a large lynx skin robe that was warmer than a dozen pairs of blankets, under which the 3 might sleep. A waterproof, a large tanned moose skin, and a couple of pairs of blankets would be sufficient to lie upon. Then the commissariat was considered. Sugar, tea, evaporated potatoes, dried fruit, etc., to be used in the preparation of every meal, were put into small canvas bags, and those into a large sack. The general stores were put away in waterproof canvas sacks, which were marked to indicate contents. The axes of the party were ground and sharpened. At last all was ready for the advance. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 6 Hitting the Trail. To be early on the trail was an essential to Hugh Spencer. He was up at 4 on the morning of the start, harnessed the dogs, carried the outfit to the sleigh, and lashed it on. Then he aroused his friends, who, when dressed, found that an early breakfast had been arranged for them of bacon, eggs, and beans. "Better put lots next to your ribs, for there isn't room to cook a meal on the trail between here and White Pass City," was the advice they received. They left the restaurant after a kindly good-bye from the old lady. John and George tied their handbags, containing underclothing, towel, soap, etc., and socks to the load. The main portion of their extra clothing was left in the general supplies. Of the 5 dogs, he of the stubbed tail, Dude the leader, was the only one that appeared to take an interest in the proceedings, for he was standing watching his master. The others were mere balls of fur lying in the snow. Hugh went ahead and harnessed himself in the cord that was tied to the front of the sleigh, and grasped the gee-pole, lashed as a single shaft on the right side of the sleigh. "Mush!" he ordered. Dude gave a tug at the traces, and the other dogs stood up. "Mush!" was ordered again. The whole 5 dogs strained at the traces, in a half-hearted sort of way, not sufficient to move the load. Hugh then let go of his hold of the pole, threw off his harness, and picked up a whip that was tucked under the lashings of the load. Behind Dude was 2 Bits, then came 4 Bits, Tom and Jerry. Beginning with 2 Bits, he gave each a cut with the whip, causing heart-rending howls, but Dude stood throughout the ordeal, evidently oblivious to the sufferings of his companions, his tongue protruding. He was a picture of conscious virtue. Dude knew these signs of the trail, the stern, hard life, the cut of the whip, the cry of the dog. Hugh then cracked the whip, re-harnessed himself in the cord, and grasped the gee-pole. "Mush!" he ordered. The 5 dogs strained at the traces, taking quick, furtive glances over their shoulders at the man with the whip. The load moved. The march towards the great and golden Klondike had started. Early as they were, they saw, as they reached the main street, others on the trail, and up the long avenue heading north between the great mountains, horse teams, dog teams, and men unaided were drawing their loads. The wind was roaring down the pass, cutting their faces like a knife. They now appreciated the special virtues of the parka, for with hood drawn over their head, as they bent before the gale, their faces largely escaped the cutting blasts, and the light material of which the garment was made was wonderfully effective in keeping the wind from their bodies. Although the recent storm had improved the travelling, it was not long before the sleigh grated on gravel and stopped, the dogs appearing instinctively to realize that the noise meant further effort was useless. Hugh said nothing, but disengaged himself from his harness, went to the rear of the load, and undid a coil of rope from either side, to which Berwick and Bruce were harnessed also. He then resumed his position. Mush! The 3 men and 5 dogs threw themselves against the load. There was a shriek from the gravel, and the sleigh glided again over the soft snow. The difficulty being over, Hugh told his friends to disengage themselves and throw the cords back on the load, which they did, after protesting that they had better remain in harness and help to pull. "No, you fellows can each take a turn at the gee-pole when I get tired," Hugh said. It was only necessary for Hugh to pass the time of day with a southbound traveller when the train would stand, their tongues lolling out, their eyes vacantly staring. 'Tis the nature of the beast. The native dogs of the north never give the impression that they work because they feel it their duty. They work because they know there is a stronger will than theirs behind them, a will with a whip. The party moved steadily along for a mile or two, when the road left the flats and took to the side hill at the right hand of the canyon. A considerable amount of work had been done, and the trail was in good shape, but they had not gone far before they were met by a toll gate. 25 cents each, and $2.50 for the dog team, was demanded of them, which they paid. The keeper of the toll gate seemed happy. He was prospering, and those who employed him were making money. John and George thought the charge excessive, but Hugh was exercising his wits, calculating how much the proprietors made out of what he called their graft. Not far beyond the toll gate they met an old man sitting by a fire under the lee of a wall of rock. He was off the trail in a sort of little cove, and on the much betramped snow around was a sleigh, and by it 5 goats in harness. The old man merely looked up as the 3 friends approached, and went on poking the fire. "Well, partner, enjoying the scenery?" asked Hugh in his good-natured manner. "No, I wish I was dead." "How's that?" "These ornery goats here, I can't do nothing with them, and if it wasn't for poor little Bess back home, I'd shoot them and myself too." "What's the trouble?" "Well, the ornery critters won't pull a pound, and the fellow who sold them to me down in Seattle said they was just the thing for the pass, better'n dogs, for I could feed 'em on birch browse, but I lit out from Skagtown 4 days ago, and could get no further than this. I pretty near had to pull the sleigh and goats too to get this far, and I pitched camp here, where I've stayed ever since. You see, it's this way. The old woman died last fall, and after she died the poor old farm went plumb to pieces, hard times, and mortgage falling due. So I got a sickening of the old place without the old woman, and I let the farm go and put little Bess to school for a year, and lit out for the Klondike. Bess ain't Bess by rights. She was Christianized Matilda Jane, and we called her Bess for short. Well, the old woman was always building on bringing up Bess a real lady, and afore she died I promised I'd give Bess a good schooling and help all I could, and I took to the Klondike, hearing all a fellow had to do was to get there, and he'd be rich. Here I am now, and I ain't got no more money. I'm just trying to make up my mind to shoot the blamed goats and pull my stuff back to Skagtown and sell it. Then I guess I'll go packing on the Chilkoot along with the Siwashes." The old man seemed to forget the presence of the strangers, and muttered, "Poor little Bess. Poor little Bess. I was hoping to make her a real lady with silks and satins and diamonds and kid gloves and fancy eyeglasses." Hugh cracked the whip. John tightened on the cord, the dogs threw themselves into the traces, and the trio was on its way up the pass. No one spoke for some time. Each was thinking of the old man's tale, and of such as that old man there were hundreds in the passes. The trail, as they struggled along, proved to be more and more built against the side hill, and frequently the sleigh showed a disposition to slide into the canyon, so that all were compelled to give attention to it. But the 3 men taking turn at the gee-pole, they had soon crossed the Killaman Creek, and were at the foot of Porcupine Hill. The time had passed quickly, and the air, though cold, was highly stimulating. George and John voted the parka a wonderful garment. Arriving at the base of the hill, Hugh quickly undid the fastenings, piled half the load on the side of the trail, and relashed the balance to the sleigh. Then he and John set about the task of taking the first load to the top of the hill, while George mounted guard at the base. Hugh took the gee-pole. John harnessed himself in the cord that was attached to the left-hand rear of the sleigh. So they set out. The hill made a rise of several hundred feet in the first quarter of a mile, and in some places seemed almost standing on end; but straining, pulling, tugging, men and dogs both, they eventually reached the top. They soon had the sleigh unloaded, and Hugh was off down again for the remainder of the load. In 3/4 of an hour they were all together again. Then began the descent, which was almost as acute as the rise had been. They adjusted the necessary brakes by tying a piece of rope around each runner. Before leaving the summit of Porcupine Hill they had a good look at the view. Across the valley in front, set in a basin of the mountains, was a collection of buildings and tents constituting White Pass City. 2 long lines of men and teams marked the White Pass, one on the left side of the canyon, the other on the canyon bottom. The hillside trail was used by horses, mules, and oxen, while in the wedge-like canyon bottom men and dogs toiled. The reason for the hillside trail was that its ascent was more gradual, the lower trail having many abrupt rises up which horses and oxen could not clamber. The scene of toil and labour, backed by the sublimity of the surroundings, impressed the beholders. But the party came to life again with Hugh's order, "Mush!" The dogs struggled with the load over the brink of the decline, down which the sleigh quickly passed, and the party was not long in reaching White Pass City. This was the first depot out from Skagway, and was distant there from 12 miles. From White Pass City to Lake Bennett the distance was 24 miles, so they were now 1/3 of the way; but the 12 miles they had passed was the easiest part of the journey. Saloons and restaurants in wide array, and numerous stables in the shape of tents tied down and guyed against the ever-recurring blasts, comprised White Pass City. And how the wind did blow from the funnel-shaped canyon across the basin in which the town was built! Notwithstanding the cold, beasts of burden were standing in all directions, tied to posts and rails, while the dogs seemed without number. It being now late in the day, there were more teams returning from the summit and Bennett than were setting out. Amongst those returning they met a man with a dozen pack mules. Long icicles hung from his moustache, powdery snow was driven into the folds of his parka, his cheeks were alternate patches of blue and crimson. His manner was blustering, because he was glad at having returned, and proud that he had done so without losing any horses. "Hello," said Hugh, "what's it like on the summit?" "What's it like? Look here, stranger, if I owned hell and that summit, I'd sell the summit and live in hell, so help me. What's the matter with the summit? Why, if that cursed wind ain't blowin' from the north cold enough to freeze hell, then it's blowin' from the south, and snowin' as if all the feather beds in the New Jerusalem were being split open and shaken loose. I'll be hanged if the mounted police ain't got a stable and storehouse scooped out under the snow, and the roof standing up like as if it was a rock. About 60 feet of snow has fallen up there this winter, and how them poor devils of policemen hold things down in tents is more than I know. A fellow can tackle it for a day or two, but these fellows have been up there since early in February." "It's a way they have in the army," suggested George, always an ardent Briton. "Those fellows are different from any army fellows I ever seed," was the stranger's reply. The pack train was called to a halt. The communicative stranger and his assistants were taking the saddles off the mules, but for once the dogs were impatient and restless. Instinct told them they were near the end of their day's work, and the prospect of food. So Hugh let them have their way, and they drew up in front of a restaurant which bore the legend, "Meals 75 cents." "Better go in and eat, fellows, and I'll look after the dogs," said Hugh. His friends demurred, but he insisted. So they entered the restaurant. There was the same motley crowd feeding in the same savage manner as at Skagway. Everybody smoked on the trail, in all places and under any condition, save where the pipe froze and refused its duty. The hour was between 2 and 3. Berwick and his comrade thought they had never been so hungry. How they relished the hot soup, and the meat, potatoes, and beans! And when they drank! George finished his dinner first, and scrambled off to relieve Hugh, whom he found cutting up pieces of raw meat for the dogs. "Raw meat ain't any too good for dogs, but after they get over the summit they will get down to boiled rice and tallow, and that ain't far off." Hugh was certainly the favourite of the dogs just then, but soon after George's arrival he put the piece of meat he had been dividing into a sack and threw it on the sleigh, and hurried to the restaurant, saying that he would boil the rest of the meat for the dogs after he himself had something to eat. Look out for Soapy's gang, was his final warning to George. After Hugh had his dinner is the midday, supper the evening meal on the trail, he remarked that he would take a mooch round. When he returned, he greeted his friends with, "Say, I found a fellow I know here running one of these stables, and he has a tent with a lot of hay in it, and says we can sleep in that, which will save us making camp. We can put the dogs inside, and run less chances of having them stolen, also the grub." So Dude was aroused from his sleep. 4 other doggy noses were withdrawn from under 4 bushy tails, and to the accompaniment of howls the load was removed to the hay tent, the dogs unharnessed, the load unpacked. Hugh undid the bedding and spread it on a pile of straw. "This will be the last bed we'll strike for some time after we leave," was his remark. He grabbed the sack with the meat and went off to see if he could find space on a stove to boil it. He soon returned with the meat, as well as a bucket in which were canine dainties, kitchen scraps. "Chuck it into you," was Hugh's remarks to the dogs as he threw them the food. "You'll have to work to morrow." As there was nothing to do now till that morrow, the 3 again strolled out to look at the trail, up which the full flow of traffic was now toiling. Profanity filled the air. The travellers cursed the trail, they cursed their horses, cursed their dogs, the wind, the country generally. They wandered into a saloon, which, as ever, was reeking with tobacco, and vibrating to the notes of "Home, Sweet Home," reeled off a gramophone. Hugh looked cautiously at the company. "Soapy's men," he whispered. So he and his companions went. John noticed that a good deal of money was being won at the tables, but Hugh told him that the men who were winning were Soapy's staff. "They seem to run a wonderful system," said John. "Yes. Soapy pretty nearly owns the whole shop from the Lynn Canal to the summit." "But why does he stop at the summit?" "Police." "But they have police on this side." "Not the same." "How do you account for that?" "Don't know. Discipline. The Canadian police are not grafting. Fellows I've met from the inside tell me that Cap Constantine gave records for all the rich claims in Bonanza, and neither he nor any of the rest of the mounted police grafted any. That's what I call honest. But now, since the records have been taken away from the police, there's nothing but grafting going on. Fellows have to give up half interest in claims to the officials before they can get record. And even the government is grafting officially with this 10% royalty. If some of those members of Parliament back in Canada were here, with this proposition, getting over these passes, they'd think they had a right to all they'd found in this country. And now they are taking part of it away. It's a shame, I call it." They had walked up the lower trail leading to the summit. Whatever men and horses were to be seen were making down the pass, for the trail that clung to the side of the mountain was so narrow that 2 horses, going in opposite directions, could not pass each other. So in the morning the horses passed up the trail, and in the afternoon down. That was the unwritten law. They returned to the sleeping quarters. Every dog except Dude had his nose under his tail, and was apparently oblivious to all outside concerns. Dude's tail was not long enough to cover his nose, and Hugh noticed his eyes quiver and open slightly. On the floor was the empty meat sack. The 5 dogs had demolished the large piece of dead horse. "That's Dude," said Hugh. "Which?" "Why, stealing that meat. Before we get to Dawson you'll know what a high-class article in the stealing line he is. However, there'll be lots more dead horses. They kill about a dozen a day between here and Bennett." "How do they manage that?" "Wait till to-morrow, and you'll see." End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 7. Hugh's Philosophy. The stars were still shining when the friends tore themselves, stiff and sore, from under their lynx-skin robe on the morrow, to dress in the chill atmosphere of the tent. But the sounds of movement were everywhere. Commands, embellished with profanity, were being shouted. When the 3 adventurers, after a hurried breakfast, eagerly went out, a sickly light was spreading over the mountains, which seemed spectral and immense. "We'll take the flour, sugar, and hardware in the first 2 loads," remarked Hugh, as he began selecting these supplies. "And it won't do any harm to hang our bacon sack from a rafter while we are away, as a stray malamute might get in here. These blamed dogs will chew a tin can open to get at the meat inside." The plan of campaign suggested by Hugh and endorsed by the others was to divide the supplies in 3 loads; to take 2, comprising the reserve stores, to the summit and cache them, then, on the following day, to carry the remainder of the stuff right through to Log Cabin, or to Bennett, if they could manage it, and establish a camp there. This depended on the condition of the trail. Early as they were, there were scores of outfits setting out, and many were ahead of them. They had not gone far when they met 2 men and a dog team. One of the men was belabouring the dogs with a whip, making them howl dreadfully. Dude and the rest of the team halted, and with their masters watched the proceedings. The dogs belaboured were soon tangled among the traces in fine confusion. Each animal, as he saw a stroke coming his way, jumped sideways with a howl, and buried his nose and feet in the snow. The cruelty aroused the anger of John and George, who made a move towards the brute with the whip. Hugh caught him by the arm and pulled him back. "Better not make yourself a Humane Society in this country. You'll only get into trouble. Besides, he ain't hurting the dogs. Wait." When the man rested from the belabouring, Hugh asked to be allowed to "try the dogs." The fellow glared angrily at him, but then, with a surly nod, gave the permission. Hugh started with the leaders, and worked down the whole line, placing the dogs in order once again, hauling them about, but saying nothing. Then he took the gee-pole and ordered "mush." The leader looked back over his shoulder, as did the dog next to him. "Mush!" again cried Hugh. The dogs drew steadily at their collars, glancing furtively at their new master. Hugh once more encouraged them, and when the load began to move, passed on his charge to the owner, who had the grace to look sheepish. "To handle dogs," said Hugh, when he had rejoined his party and had resumed the trail, "you've got to get them frightened of you; and moving round them, silent like, puts fear in their souls. You see, that fellow wasn't really hurting them. They could hardly feel that light whip through their fur, and their feet and noses, where they are tender, they stuck in the snow. As for howling, it comes natural to Malamoots. No, you've got to treat them just as you do women." The trail often became precipitous, but as the combined strength of the 3 men and the dogs were sufficient to lift the load bodily, their difficulties were well overcome. They had not been out of the White Pass City an hour when George shouted "Look!" and pointed to the mountain side to the left. The trail away above them was lined with horses, moving slowly forward; but down the mountain side 8 burros were plunging, head tied to tail, as is the custom. Every dog team on the lower trail had stopped to watch the sight, for there was a great rattling of rock, and a general shout calling attention to the catastrophe. The unfortunate creatures soon reached the base of the slide, and were lost in the soft snow. They struggled, and they disappeared. One more sacrifice to that dreadful trail, which during the Klondike rush had claimed the lives of 3,500 animals. In that canyon between White Pass City and the summit, during the spring of 1898, it was possible to walk long distances on the bodies of dead horses; and to this day the line of march is marked by protruding bones, indicating the graves of the patient and faithful creatures sacrificed to man's insatiable greed for gold. "Now you see where the dog food comes from," remarked Hugh. The accident had occurred a little in front of them, and shortly afterwards 2 men were seen floundering through the soft snow down the side hill to the beaten trail, along which the dog teams were pressing. "You had hard luck," Hugh called to them. "Yes, I couldn't keep that blamed bell burro from experimenting how near he could go to the side without falling off, till at last he got his needings," replied one of the drivers. "Whose outfit were they?" "Rivers, and the Canadian government owns the supplies. Police stuff. They can stand it." The 2 drivers went on down the trail to White Pass City. The Canadian government was evidently not popular. The iniquities of the royalty on gold, and the grafting current in the Gold Commissioner's office in Dawson, were resented. As the party progressed up the pass, they found its walls coming closer together, making the canyon so narrow that the horse trail on the mountain side appeared directly overhead. Numbers of dead cattle appeared by the side of the path, telling of the calamities of the trail. Veterans of the trail will tell weird tales of horses, goaded by whip and burden, deliberately throwing themselves into the canyon below, seeking surcease from suffering in death. As the canyon became narrower, so did the trail become more congested. It also grew steeper as they neared the summit, and men and dogs had frequently to pause for rest. It appeared to John a curious struggling mass that surrounded him. Strange oaths in all accents came to his ears. The multitude were striving in a race in which brute force alone could conquer. They came to a party in trouble, and overheard an argument. I tell you the territory clear through to Lake Bennett belongs to the United States, and I'm convoy for the United States Customs. I ain't going to let you get over the summit until you pay my wages for 4 days more. That is, 2 days from the summit to Lake Bennett loaded, and 2 days back again from Bennett to Skagway, travelling light, and that's going some too. It amounts to $32 at $8 per day, so all you've got to do is pay up. No, you don't own the land beyond the summit. Don't you see the English flag up there, that red thing flying from the tent pole? All you've got to do is show me over the summit, and we're quits. I've paid you $40 already, 3 days doing nothing at White Pass City during the storm, and you lost the money playing blackjack. I ain't got any more money to pay you anyway. I can't pay you when I ain't got the money. Well, dig for it. Sell part of your outfit. You can't bluff me. I'm an officer of the United States Customs, and I'm on to my job." "More grafting," muttered Hugh. So it was that these convoys, armed with authority more or less real, harassed and blackmailed the victims. They were now near the summit, in the midst of the last struggle which would put them over the most difficult portion of the trail, and the excitement was general. There was a deal of shouting, and a great renewal of effort. The horse trail and the lower trail merged into one. At last they were through. The narrow defile curved to the right, an open basin appeared, with strewn tents and an endless promise of supplies, and, most conspicuous of all, side by side, the flags of Britain and the United States were flying. A dozen members of the Canadian Mounted Police, wearing the uniform of England's Queen, were examining freight, with their backs to the wind, or passing in and out of a tent, half buried in snow, which served as an office. This was the second great depot out from Skagway, and piled about everywhere were loads of freight. Outfits stood about in disorder, awaiting the returning tide of men, while constantly teams were arriving from, or setting out to, Bennett. The outfit of Hugh and his companions was finally passed by 11 o'clock. Goods of Canadian manufacture were allowed to pass free, and the charges against the few American goods were of no great amount. Hugh selected a projecting rock on which to make his cache, and the policeman who examined his baggage, and whose good offices the party had won, promised to keep an eye on their goods. "Soapy doesn't operate on this side," said the man in uniform significantly. "We could coast back in half an hour if the trail was clear," Hugh remarked, as they started on the return. As it was, they sat on the sleigh most of the way to White Pass City, which they reached at noon, as a man was pounding a great triangle of steel with an iron rod, announcing dinner. The three were very well pleased with their morning's work. There were not quite so many teams on the trail in the afternoon, and they reached the summit by 3:30. The sun had been shining all day, so that the atmosphere seemed mellower, and the wind did not blow so strongly. After passing the goods they had time to climb the ridge on which the police tents were erected. From thence they gazed down the valley, which they knew was the uppermost watershed of the mighty Yukon, whose course makes a great curve of 2,400 miles ere it flows into the Bering Sea. Far in the distance they could see a stunted growth of timber, but their immediate surroundings were mountains, hardly less overpowering than in White Pass City. The view impressed them. The scene was weird in its desolation. They felt that stirring incidents were to take place in that great valley before them. "Looks as if we would have a touch of spring to morrow, and I guess we had better have our snow glasses ready before we set out," said Hugh. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of the Great Gold Rush. A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush. A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 8. Over the Summit. Hugh's prediction came true, for on the morning following a gentle breeze was blowing from the south, soft with the touch of spring. The first light that came over the mountains was a softening blue. "Roll out and get the kinks out of you fellows. We've got to be first on the trail today." They had breakfast, the dogs were harnessed, and the party on the march by 4:30. Though the light was uncertain, it was not hard to keep the trail. By 6 they were at the summit, greeting the police sentinel who had been on guard there through the night, and marvelling at the wealth of colours that lit the eastern sky. Mush! The dogs were off. The sleigh slid down upon the frozen plain of Summit Lake. The lightness with which it glided along seemed to assure the party that their troubles were over. As the dogs trotted along, it required a pace faster than a walk to keep up with them. So Hugh induced his two companions to sit on the load, saying that he would take a ride after a while. At 9 they reached Log Cabin, passed without a halt, it being merely a police depot used for cutting firewood, though it had been the customs post before the Canadian government had asserted proprietary rights to the summit. Almost invariably, when greetings were exchanged with those met on the trail, the humour played about Soapy. "Say, you're hustling. I guess you ain't chechachoes. How's Soapy? Going to run for president next trip?" "I guess so, if he ain't hung in the meantime. Looks like that he was the whole thing in the passes." As the party at 1 o'clock drew into Bennett, they saw one party eating dinner in the open, with sleigh loaded and dogs harnessed beside them. A pile of spruce boughs denoted where these strangers had slept, and where their tent, now drawn up on their sleigh, had been erected. "Moving camp?" asked Hugh. "Yes." "I don't suppose you're going to take your location away with you?" "I guess not." "Then it will just suit us, and we can use your fire. This is what I call lucky," said Hugh, as he began unlashing the load and throwing the bundles of supplies on the spruce bed. George was busying himself undoing the supplies while John replenished the fire. George cooked bacon. Hugh mixed flour, baking powder, and water for slapjacks, the large pancakes of the frontier. As they worked, Hugh reopened conversation with the strangers. "Where's your new location?" "Down the lake 5 miles. Got wind of a good bunch of timber there, and hauled a load down this morning. One of our fellows stayed down making camp while us two came back for the rest of the stuff." "How long have you been coming from Skagway?" 3 weeks. A week here, and 2 weeks getting over the pass. Contracted with a fellow to put through our stuff at 30 cents a pound, but finally had to buy dogs and haul it ourselves. And then the storms have been something fearful up to the last few days. Sort of Dakota blizzard every day almost, after which trails was mighty bad hauling. This sort of weather comes hard on a fellow who was reared in California." "I guess it would come hard on a fellow reared at the North Pole. You fellows will have your boat built in lots of time." "Yes, if we don't take to quarrelling like the rest of the blame fools around here." "What are those fellows doing here?" Hugh nodded to the great array of tents spread over the sandhills that lie between Lake Bennett and Lake Lindeman. "Most of them don't know what they're doing, but I guess they put in their time quarrelling. Old mossbacks from the East, who have lived neighbours all their lives and been best of friends, have come up here partners, and before they got through the passes were calling each other the names they heard used by the old timers to their dogs. It takes the police all their time settling disputes. The habit seems to have took all round, now that they are through their troubles and have only straight hard work, whip-sawing lumber, ahead of them. Why, say, I saw 2 fellows the other day dividing their outfit. They took a 2-faced axe and drove it into a log, and with the face sticking up and a hammer they cut a whip-saw in 2, making it no good for either, and swearing at each other all the time till you could smell sulphur. They cut stoves in 2, and boats, after working hard to build them. It seems a new kind of bug house that has got hold of them." The strangers were now washing up their dishes and packing them away. "Here, take this, hand me a plate," and one of them poured some stewed prunes out of a pot, and from another emptied into a second plate beans and bacon. "But you fellows could take these along," protested Hugh. "No, we couldn't. They'd get spilled. Besides, we have some beefsteak for supper. Some fellows down near the lake killed an ox this morning, and you can get steak for 6 bits per pound, if it ain't all gone. Good-bye." The strangers went off down the hill to the lake. Pipes were lit, and the 3 lay in the sun smoking. The day was glorious, and the party had removed their snow glasses, so that they were able to view their surroundings to the full. Mountains gleamed and glistened everywhere in the distance, but did not appear so overpowering or inspiring as in the pass, though more beautiful. How pure the air seemed, and spotless the snow! Though the sun was warm and the party comfortable, there were duties to be performed. So, not without groans, Hugh and his friends started to erect camp. After the tent was up, Hugh put pots of beans, prunes, and rice on to boil, the rice being for the dogs, as there was small prospect of getting dead horse in Bennett. After the bed had been made, and the supplies stored in the tent, and more wood cut, there was nothing to be done, so Hugh went off among the tents on a mooch round, with an eye for beefsteak. George, acting as cook, stayed at home. John also went sightseeing. He took a different trail from his friend, crossed to the west side of the stream that led from Lake Lindeman to Lake Bennett, and walked in the direction of a smokestack, the local sawmill, half a mile distant. As he strolled through the array of tents, he heard angry voices proceeding from one of them. "I tell you he's no good," one was shouting. "I had to pull most all the way up the Chilkoot, him saying he had rheumatism, backache, toothache, heartburn, everything but the mumps, for them I could see. And then, when we did get over the summit, it's me who had to do all the pulling." "It's a lie! You're a low dog! And didn't I have to take whiskey along before you'd travel at all? I tell you, Mr. Policeman, he's no good, he's a skunk, and I wouldn't take a skunk into Dawson with me, not if I never got there, nor never saw the $1 million claim I guess I'm going to get, if ever I get there." John, passing beside the tent, could see the two disputants, each seated on a log of wood, with a red-coated policeman standing in front of them. "Well," said the policeman, "if you fellows can't get on together, the only thing to do is split up the outfit, and each take what belongs to him." "I own the whole outfit," said the man with the many diseases. "No, you don't. I own the tent, the stove, the sleigh, and a whole lot of the grub," shouted the other. John passed on. Another petty problem for the mounted police. They are great men, great workers, those yellow legs. There were some industrious prentices at Lake Bennett, for down along the shore were numerous groups of men, building boats. "Like beefsteak?" asked Hugh, as John returned. "Yes, rather." A big frying pan with sizzling meat was busy on the little tin camp stove. "Keep an eye on the meat, John, while I get some water." Hugh took a pail and went off to the river. George Bruce was away with an axe getting wood, so John was left in charge. Shortly afterwards George came along, hauling a log of firewood by an axe driven into it. John ran to assist him, and when the two had returned with the wood, Hugh was arriving with the water. John again turned his attention to the frying pan. The largest piece of steak was gone. "What has happened to the steak?" John asked. Hugh looked. A grim smile came over his face. "Dude." "Dude could not steal steak out of a frying pan." "Not Dude? You bet your life that's where the steak has gone to. And there is no use licking him. The only way to cure Dude of stealing is to cut his tail off behind his ears. I told you Dude would rather steal than eat, and this shows how careful you must be." Dude was lying a picture of innocence on the snow. How he could maintain an appearance of unconcern with a broiling hot beefsteak inside him was a marvel. John looked at him amazed. The smallest slit of a black eye was watching him. "I was only away about 3 minutes." "Half a minute is enough for Dude. He likes beefsteak." Hugh refilled the pan, and then civilization knows no artifice to better the enjoyment of such a meal. They were partakers, too, of another repast. Their souls were fed by the glories of nature. The sun was setting. Its splendour spread from high in the heavens to the rugged range that yesterday had resisted them. On that vast canvas were painted salmon-coloured clouds with long ribbons of yellow, bearing the lustre of burnished gold. It was the extreme of grandeur, awe-inspiring and ennobling. The evening was very still. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 9 Storm and Stress. It was 5 o'clock on the morrow before the party was up, and 6 o'clock before, breakfast cooked and eaten, John and Hugh were on the road to the summit. They were to travel the 20 miles there, and return with 1,000 pounds of supplies. The glow of the sun was already upon the mountains when they set out. "Say, it's going to be a hot day, and it's going to thaw some. It'll make hauling easy, but our feet will be pretty wet. Good thing we've got some dry socks and rubbers in our outfit at the summit. Another thing is, we're going to meet a whole lot of fellows on the trail the way we're going to-day, and what's worse, we'll get more of them coming back." Sure enough, after they left Log Cabin, they could see the toilers coming, winding in a snake-like procession among the hills. Hugh had prophesied correctly. By 11 o'clock they were in their shirt-sleeves. The dazzling whiteness of the snow, reflected from all sides, made the use of smoke-glasses necessary, but the perspiration, dimming the glass, troubled their sight. The end of John's nose became painful, his cheeks burned. It reminded him of the after-effects of his first sunny spring day on the water in England. They met and passed scores of teams, and still more were pouring over the summit when they arrived there at 1 o'clock. It was 2:30 before they had their feet encased in German socks and rubber shoes, and their load ready again for the trail. We can't make home before dark, but we should be able to make Log Cabin by 7, after which the trail will be clear, and we should arrive by 10. This trail will be mighty good going after it starts to freeze, which it will do, soon as the sun goes down." At 4 o'clock they were 3 miles on the trail. There was already frost in the air. Ere another half hour had passed, Hugh felt his cheek smitten by a gust of wind, laden with particles of ice. "I thought so," he exclaimed. "These last few days have shown too large a pay streak of spring to last. We're in for trouble. It will be down on us in half an hour. All we can do is to keep on as we are going, steadily. I guess we shall make Log Cabin, but not with this load. The soft snow makes 1,000 pounds too much for the dogs. Look!" He pointed to a miniature cyclone coming along the trail, drinking up the ice particles as it whirled. It struck them sharply as a gust of wind. The first contact of the storm was cold and cutting. Then the wind veered, and down came the snow. The sleigh was soon too heavy. "The only thing is to cache the sleigh and turn the dogs loose. The chances are we won't be able to keep the trail in this storm, and if we do come out alive, we won't be able to find the sleigh if we abandon it far from the trail." "Do you think the storm will be very bad?" "It's bad now, ain't it? How long will it be before there is 18 inches of snow on this trail? For a time we can keep it by feeling it hard under us, but we are liable to get off it, and once lost there is no finding it again. Mind, the wind is blowing from the right, half to the rear. Here's a tree. I've noticed this lone spruce before, and we can find it again. Let us stand the sleigh up against it, and turn the dogs loose." So to the tree dogs and men struggled. The dogs were unhitched, harness was piled on top of the load. Then, with a great effort, the men managed to upend the load against the tree. Hugh called Dude to him, and pulled an old envelope out of his pocket, on which he scratched, "Cached sleigh on north side of trail by spruce tree, 5 miles from the summit. Hugh Spencer." This he tied to a handkerchief, and that to Dude's collar. "It's no harm letting George know where the grub is, for if we don't find camp again, Dude will." The dogs went, Dude leading, and were soon lost to sight. Down the trail the two men strode. The snow was 6 inches deep already, the wind piling it upon the trail. The weather did not feel cold. In fact, both were comfortably warm. For an hour they plodded along. Occasionally one would plunge into the soft snow and scramble back onto the beaten trail. Conversation was not much indulged in. The light began to fail, yet they stumbled along. There was nothing they could recognize in the boulders and cliffs that loomed around them in a deathly monotony. For half an hour darkness was upon them, when Hugh remarked that Log Cabin could not be far away. Immediately following his remark they plunged into soft snow. The trail seemed to have come to an end, but this could not be so. They retraced their steps and regained firm footing. They felt cautiously around with their feet, but could find the underlying snow hard only in the direction whence they came. "I guess we're off the trail, and have walked along a bank where the wind has packed the old snow good and hard. Looks to me as if we was lost." "Don't give up," said John. "Give up? I ain't giving up, but we're lost. I won't give up as long as I can wiggle." "What had we better do?" "Keep moving. If you don't, you freeze." Spencer's voice was low and serious as he said, "Keep the wind on your right side, and if you've got any last will and testament to make, scratch it on a piece of paper and leave it in your pocket before your hands get numb or your mind weak. We're up against it hard. We will stay together, of course, but should we get separated, don't move too fast, or you will tire yourself out and go to sleep in the snow. Don't let sleep take hold of you, or you're dead. Just keep moving fast enough to keep warm, or at least from freezing. Go downhill rather than up, and don't fall over a cliff. Have you ever been up against a life and death proposition? If not, you're pretty near one now." They proceeded on their uncertain journey, but were soon floundering in soft snow. They kept on. It was easy enough to say, "Keep going downhill," but so far as John was concerned, he seemed to be walking uphill all the time. They frequently exchanged shouts, and so remained together. For hours they plodded on, the snowfall growing less but the cold greater. John began to act, to call, mechanically. His mind in that desolate trampling was transported to happier places. He thought of his Alice Peel. She was probably, he mused, thinking of him also. Did her mind ever picture such experiences as he was now realizing? She would possibly read in the newspapers of the great rush of gold seekers over those terrible mountains and through the stormy passes. If he should die in that storm, and months afterwards she heard of his demise. The thought drifted along to several loose ends. He must not sleep, or he would die, and it was his duty to live. But, oh, to sleep! His father and the old school, the church services! How much he would like to hear the old organ and the choir! It had been the family wish that he should take holy orders, and he had refused the vocation, feeling it not his. Had he done right? He believed, yes. He might be about to meet his Creator. What might his record be? His mind went back to an occasion in Australia, when he had been lost in the bush, and had wandered for days without water, till some blacks found him. He remembered, before going into unconsciousness with his back against a rock, that a vulture was watching him. He had taken a piece of stone, and, pretending it was a pistol, had pointed it at the bird. John Berwick's mind was picturing sand and heat, while above him roared the Arctic storm. How cold it was getting, and the wind was beginning to blow. The parka did not sufficiently protect his face. Hugh shouted out that they were crossing a lake, and there might be a camp along its edge. They came in due course to the other side of the lake, with the cliff so steep they could not climb it. They followed the shore to the right, facing the storm. They crossed another lake, and still another. The air had grown intensely cold, the wind was higher, and ever there came that terrible inclination to lie down and sleep. After they had passed over the last little lake, Hugh shouted to John that they were surely now far from the proper trail, as he could recollect no such water near Bennett. Lake Lindeman was 4 miles long. The wind was rising, and the increasing cold told that it came from the north. Hugh began now really to doubt whether they would live through the storm. Soon afterwards fine ice crystals impinged against their faces. Great swirls of wind fell upon them. This new severe onslaught of nature aroused John, who called to his comrade. He had suddenly realized how very, very close they were to death. "The snow is going. It's easier walking," he said suddenly. They closed together, and struggled along abreast. They were too nearly dead to notice that the going was good. Suddenly John fell into the soft snow, and Hugh, exerting his worn powers, dragged him back. "The trail! The trail!" gasped John, with his face close to Hugh's. "Trail! We ain't been on any trail for hours. Feel with your feet." Hugh stopped to feel with his feet 2 runner tracks of horse sled. Hope came to them, made a great call to their resources. Meanwhile their tired hearts and very weary bodies endured the bombardment of the snow-laden wind, which seemed to penetrate them, taking the heat of life from their vitals. They came to another lake. How the wind cut! The snow, driven over the surface of the ice, gave a hard, grinding noise. Would ever they come to the end of that pitiless journey? Bang! They stumbled against a sleigh standing in the middle of the road. Hugh kicked at it. The single-tree rattled. He recognized the sound. He gave a desperate shout. Another and another. Then at last the promise of relief and of life came to them. They smelt smoke. Just for a second, that creosotic odour was to them as sweetest perfume. It meant life, warmth, comfort, human companionship. The figure of a man with a lantern loomed up before them, and a deep voice asked, "What's the matter?" "We're lost," said John. "No, you're not. You're right here on Crater Lake, just over the summit of the Chilkoot." "Oh, thank God!" said Hugh. "We're the police. Come inside." They staggered into a tent warmed by a tin stove, on which was a pot of coffee. The man quickly produced cups, and gave them to drink. John Berwick just fell on a pile of wood, stacked near the stove, and fell asleep. Now that the great struggle against the elements, which force of personality rather than strength of limbs had carried him through, was over, he collapsed. When the policeman returned with bread and meat for them, he found Hugh removing his friend's shoes, and brushing the snow from his legs. "Let him sleep," said Hugh. In far-away London, at that very hour, in England high noon, Alice Peel was walking down Regent Street. Her spirits were restless. The bustling traffic, the interest of the shops, the passing of the people, could not keep her thought from a far wanderer. She was weary of this ordered civilization, and, remembering John and his adventures, heard the call of the wilds. There was now a possibility for this yearning to be satisfied. Her father, Surgeon Major Peel, had lost his money through a sudden misfortune, and had been prompted by the news from the Klondike also to make a bid for fortune there, not as a gold seeker, but in his own profession. He was convinced that a hospital in that desperate region would be in all ways a good venture. Alice had determined to accompany him. To her, that spring morning, even with all the fever of restlessness in her blood, was full of hope. The soft air and the sunshine were conditions. How different from those endured by Berwick and his comrade in their life and death march. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 10. An Empire's Outpost. After 2 hours of solid sleep, the blanket was lifted from the exhausted gold seekers, and they were shaken back into life. "Get up and eat, you need it." Still aching in every bone, the two poor fellows staggered to their feet. A dim light was penetrating the canvas as they looked about them. Underneath was ice, the frozen surface of Crater Lake, on which were spread piles of blankets, the beds of the police. Notwithstanding the fire, the air of the tent was chill and frosty, and the canvas flapped in the wind. The walls of the tent were dark, showing the level of the snow around them. The presence of this snow, no doubt, explained how the tent had withstood the fury of the gale. The policeman led the way to the cook tent, where they were given bacon and slapjacks. "Can't make bread here, and don't get it very often from Dia, so we're just out now," apologized the policeman who acted as cook. While they were eating ravenously, the officer in command of the post called to see them and inquired if they were any the worse for their experiences. "Hardly salubrious, the climate, eh?" he said, after they had answered his particular questions. "On several occasions we have had the tents blown down, and frequently the men had to sit up all night holding the poles to prevent a catastrophe. I must say our fellows have shown great grit under most trying circumstances. You see, we're on a civil campaign here, and there is not the excitement of fighting to keep the men up." With that the officer left the tent. A policeman glanced after him and muttered, "Civil campaign! Hear the old man talk! We're holding down the blooming passes for the Queen, that's what we're doing. We could live in comfort at Lindeman, with all the wood we want for cabins and to burn." "Where do you get your wood?" "Down the trail, when we get any at all. They send a horse up from Lindeman. The last few days the trail has been pretty good, and some teams have been hauling from there to here, but we got only one load, which won't last us through the storm if it holds much longer." "Do you collect much duty here?" "Well, rather. The old man just dumps the money he takes in a leather sack, and the other day he had $35,000 in it, but he hasn't got that much now. He sent one of the fellows down to Skagway with it. It was rather risky, for all the hard cases travelling the passes got to know the sack, and there was a good deal of risk of the fellow getting shot, but he went through the whole gang and got on the boat at Dia and crossed to Skagway." "The man had pluck." "Yes, but human nature in many ways is alike in both redskin and white men. And the police have learned to do these sort of things. Down on the plains in the old days, when the savages were mean, it was often the case that 1 or 2 policemen would ride into a reservation, arrest a redskin, and take him away, with hundreds of armed Indians yelling around them. The Indians thought the police were crazy, and it is against their religion to kill a crazy man. I guess if Soapy recognized the sack, he thought it was a job of some kind." "Do as many men come over this pass as over the White Pass?" "More. The Chilkoot is the poor man's pass. Most of the fellows who come over here haul their own stuff and pack it over the summit, or hire the Siwashes to put it to the summit and haul it from here themselves. They get it up here, and then, when they get a fine day, run it through to Lindeman or Bennett, where they build their boats. An outfit is putting in an aerial tram, that is, a cable from the foot of the big hill to the top." "This summit is too steep for horses?" "Oh, yes. It's as much as an ordinary man wants to climb it light, and it's much worse with a pack on your back, though a Siwash staggered up the other day with a cask of tar weighing 350 pounds. The sad part of it was that then he could not get his 5 cents a pound for his work. At least he came to one of our fellows, who told him to hide the barrel in the snow and not show the owner where it was till he got his money. Wait till you see the hill. It is one of the most remarkable sights, I fancy, ever seen in the world's history. Thousands of men toiling in line up 900 feet of almost perpendicular ascent. For what? To be given a chance of drowning themselves in the Yukon, or of dying of disease in the Dawson country. The time came for the evening meal, but the storm still raged outside, and the weather remained cold. It would be hard to conceive more miserable surroundings. The heat given out by the stove was scarcely felt 6 feet away, and the icy floor, snow walls, and flimsy roof sapped the body's heat. Darkness came, and bedtime. 2 policemen offered to share their bed with the guests, so that the strangers had somewhere to lay their heads. It appeared to John that he had just fallen to sleep when he was awakened by the sentry calling to all hands to dress, as water was overflowing the ice and coming into the tent. So up all hands got, hastily dressing in the frosty atmosphere. By the uncertain light of a few flickering candles, water was to be seen entering the tent. And what was the best move was a matter of discussion, till one policeman suggested that sleighs be hauled into the tent, and the beds built on them. This was done, but not before a good portion of the bedding had become wet. Let anyone who desires a picture of the hardships which policemen and civilians went through in those dreadful passes, imagine the poor fellows living in tents, with water 6 inches deep within, a storm surging without, and the thermometer many degrees below freezing point. It was 3 more days ere the wind ceased to blow, and for those 3 days the police and their guests existed under distressing conditions. At the end of the 3 days milder weather came, but the water still remained on the ice, so that it was plain the camp must be moved. Preparations were being made to do this when John and Hugh bade their kindly hosts good-bye. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 11 Another Pass. John and Hugh could not resist the temptation of looking at the far-famed Chilkoot Pass ere they turned for the last time from the Great Divide. So they mounted the steep ascent from Crater Lake to the summit. Reaching this, they found a great array of caches, or drifts of snow, the formation of which suggested a cache beneath them. A half-dozen policemen were levelling the new site for their tents. "A desperate situation for an encampment," said John, but there was no other. Looking down the pass, it presented a picture like nothing so much as a great funnel, with the side towards the sea broken out. Through this passage from the sea a long line of ant-like figures, human beings, each laden with his load, was pouring towards them. The town of Lindeman was reached at 3 o'clock. At 5 they arrived at Bennett. Dude rose up from his bed on the snow and looked at them, but the 4 other dogs were bundles of fur before the camp, refusing to give even a silent welcome. "Hurrah!" cried Bruce. "Here you are at last! I knew you would turn up safe and sound, so stayed home to have something hot ready." The 2 were ready for another meal, and as George had set up the camp stove in the tent, they were comfortable. As soon as his partners had started on the morning of the storm, George had set to work and put the stove in the tent, and for the balance of the day, till the storm came, had been cutting firewood, with no other idea than to keep busy. And great was his reward, for he had enough to do and to think of to keep him supplied during the storm and the severe weather that followed. Then, at 7 or 8 o'clock, after the snow had been falling several hours, a low wail came from outside the tent door. "Dude!" "You got the note on Dude's collar?" inquired Hugh. "Yes, but I didn't go after the grub, being too anxious about you." "That was right. The Chechikos will have the trail beaten for us to morrow. I only sent it in case we did not turn up, which we came pretty near not doing. How have your neighbours been getting on? Doing much quarrelling?" "No, they've had too much trouble keeping warm, and have limited their disputes as to who should go out into the storm and cut wood. They weren't as lucky as I in having a good supply at hand." How the wanderers appreciated their warm bed under the lynx-skin robe that night, for in their late abode the chill of the ice and water had seemed to penetrate their bones. The next day Hugh took a piece of canvas, and with a needle fashioned a sail, after which he fixed a mast in the front of the sleigh and set the sail. "You see," he explained, "when spring sets in, the wind generally blows from the south, and we might as well make it work for us." As it did when they started on the morning following. A breeze from the south filled the sail and helped the sleigh over the frozen surface of Lake Bennett. It was 3 o'clock, and as they were close upon the end of March, the days were lengthening wonderfully, so that they had not been an hour on the trail when daylight came. As the light increased, so did the wind, which relieved the dogs of almost all the weight of the load. The trail was good, and by 11 o'clock they had travelled the 20 miles to Caribou Crossing, the site of the present town of Carcross. Here Hugh called a halt, declaring they had done a good day's work, and that the recently abandoned camping ground at which they then were was too good to pass. So the dogs were unhitched, and their evening meal put to boil. While this was in process, the tent was erected and the bed made. The second day out from Lake Bennett was much like the first, and so it was until the fourth day, when they reached Miles Canyon and the White Horse Rapids. From Lake Bennett they passed Windy Arm to Tagish Lake, and on Marsh Lake, which followed, they got more away from the mountains, when their range of vision became greater. When they arrived at the foot of Marsh Lake, which merged into Miles Canyon, they found a number of men putting in a tramway, over which horses would haul freight when navigation opened, thus covering the 5 miles and avoiding the danger of the canyon and the rapids. They hauled their load along the route of the tramway to below the rapids, where the waters of the Yukon were known as the 50-mile River. Here they found a number of men building boats, but they kept steadily on. Below White Horse Rapids fewer men were on the trail. Some they met were travelling south, gaunt and haggard, unshaven, uncouth, loud of voice and wild of eye. These men had travelled the long trail from Dawson. 500 miles it was, and the heavy toil and hard food had told on their minds and natures. The party covered the 15 miles from White Horse to where the 50-mile enters Lake Le Berge, when the crust had become so soft that they could not travel, so they camped. Recently the trail had taken on new conditions, that of standing higher than the snow on either hand, like the back of a great serpent. The fact was that the general level of snow was settling under the warmth of the sun, while the trail, being packed hard, remained as it was. The tent was up and the bed made by noon. Hugh planned that the party should go to bed at 3 and "hit the trail" again at midnight. There would be no wind to aid them further, for as they left the coast range the diurnal breeze had failed. Their own efforts and those of the dogs must haul the load the final stage of 30 miles to the foot of Lake Le Berge, where they were to build their boat. They ate their dinner and spread spruce boughs, over which they placed their blankets, and enjoyed a rest in the glorious sunlight. The view from the tent was beautiful. To the north lay the stretch of the lake, on either hand of which were great rounded hills, all dazzling white. To the south, far distant, were heavy ranges of mountains. The air was that of peace and hope, and seemed full of promise of the glorious summer soon to burst over this vastness of solitude, melting the snows and flooding the hillsides with floral beauty. Presently they saw 2 black specks crossing the frozen lake far beneath, which eventually proved to be 2 human figures approaching, one some distance behind the other. The first was hauling a sled, slowly, and evidently with difficulty. Hugh at once acted. He put the kettle to boil, and filled a frying pan with beans and bacon. "I guess those fellows coming up the lake will need a little grub when they get here," he explained. "At least they can drink tea, if they're too plumb played out to eat." The actions of the leading man were very erratic. Frequently he would stop, place his hand before his eyes, and when again he endeavoured to start, would stagger, plunging into the softened snow, which broke under him, bringing him to the knees. "Snow blind," was Hugh's comment. The stranger seemed to smell the smoke from the campfire, and gave a wild halloo. The 3 answered the call. He turned towards the sound, and when he saw the camp he shook himself free of the harness and plunged through the soft snow towards it. When he saw the blankets stretched before the tent, he threw himself on them at full length, and with his fingers at his eye sockets, groaned. Sympathy being often better expressed by doing nothing, the man was left in his misery for some 10 minutes. Hugh then poured him out a cup of tea, to which was added much sugar and condensed milk. The man raised his head at a word, and showed his blackened face, made horrible by the streaks of tears and perspiration. He drank the refreshment greedily. Hugh explained the man's curious appearance. "This fellow has been taking a leaf out of the Siwash's book and blackening his face. The black saves the eyes a whole lot from the glare of the sun." The campers turned their attention to the second traveller, now plainly in sight, and noticed that the pack on his back jolted him horribly, as he broke through the trail at every 3rd or 4th step. As he wore glasses, he was evidently not in distress from his eyes. He saw the camp, staggered to it, and threw himself down, pack and all, sitting with his back against the load. He stared at the man in agony on the blankets. "Hullo, there's Bill! Ha! I told the blame fool not to travel without glasses. Wake up, Bill, and tell us your dreams." How's that wife you're so struck on outside, and you in such a hurry to give your dust to? Oh, Bill, wake up!" As the prostrate man gave no sign of hearing, his hilarious companion turned to the others, and in more moderate tones continued, "Bill and me have come from Dawson together, and he has near killed himself, me too, trying to get out and see his wife and kids. And this morning nothing would do him but he must go and tramp on his glasses and bust them. I told him to lay up to day and travel to night, but he wouldn't. Must keep moving to get to his wife. Ha! Wife be damned, I ain't got no wife." Hugh interrupted the tirade. "Have some beans?" "Sure thing, beans, yes. Nothing like beans on the trail. Besides, I don't mind eating your beans, seeing my own grub pile is most petered out. Just a little flour and baking powder left. Not much good to travel on." The man fell to eating. His manner turned from hilarity to morosity. He bolted his food. Soon his companion on the blankets moved and gasped, "Don't let that hog eat all the beans. I want some." "Ha! I thought Bill wasn't dead. You're just a bluffer, ain't you, Bill? Say, Bill, let's turn round and go back to Dawson. We can travel along with these fellows. They have lots of grub, and we can buy off them." It was evident to John and his friends that if the first stranger was the worse affected in physical condition, the second was mentally the more upset. The snow-blinded sufferer raised himself and took from Hugh the plate of beans and a second cup of tea. This man ate slowly, while his partner continued to talk. "You see, me and Bill came from Dawson together, and when we got to 30 Mile we found it open, and the blame sleigh was always sliding into the open water. I wanted Bill to chuck the sleigh and pack our grub and blankets, but Bill wouldn't. So I says, 'I'll pack my half, and you can haul your half,' and that's the way we've been coming. Bill had a hell of a time with his sleigh sliding into the river, and then coming up the lake he never could keep it on the trail. No wonder he's bughouse." When the first arrival had finished his meal, Hugh led him into the tent and bathed his eyes with fresh-made tea. In the tent the sufferer was free from the glare of the sun. Hugh hung a dark grey blanket from the ridge-pole, so that if the sufferer opened his eyes he could fix his gaze upon it. Then he went out. "How's Bill?" asked the erratic one. "Better, I hope." "Not bughouse yet?" "I don't think so." "Well, if he ain't bughouse he is sure locoed on that wife of his." Hugh made no reply, and the other continued, "Ha! That's Bill Stanbridge. Owns in on El Dorado with Slim Mulligan, who's in charge now, and will look after the clean-up. My name is Frank Miller. Just blew in about the time Carmack made discovery, but went and used my rights on Boulder Creek. Boulder showed up better on surface than Bonanza or El Dorado, but there's nothing on bedrock in Boulder." As the man got his mind away from his partner, his conversation indicated less disorder of intellect. Hugh, quickly noticing the change, and with a view to further the good process, asked, "How's Dawson?" "Dawson? She's fine. Lots of grub. Old Healy gave the boys a spiel last fall that they'd all starve if they stayed in the country, and then the speculators corralled all the grub and run up prices. But they're loosening now. You can get a pretty good meal of beans now for $2.50, even at Miss Mulroney's. Say, that girl is making money." "How's Bonanza?" "Good, but El Dorado is better. Bills go ground, some of it going $500 to the pan for picked dirt. But this high-grade pay, the government is going to send their yellow legs round to relieve the boys of 10%, and fellows with poor ground will have to pay as well as the fellows on El Dorado. That ain't fair." "It's fair to charge for the administration of the country and keeping law and order," said George. "To hell with law and order. You're a chechacho, or you wouldn't talk like that. Miners' meetings make pretty good law courts, and now they have law and order, fellows begin to lock their doors. The country was a whole lot better before ever it saw an official." "Yes, but the gang going in now will make things different," said Hugh. "You're an old-timer. Thought so when I first swallowed your beans. Chechacos don't know how to boil beans like that. You'll find a big change round Rabbit Creek when you blow in there. It's gamblers and saloon men, most, have the good claims. Of course Carmack had to put his wife's relations in next to him on discovery, and when the crowd got up from 40 Mile they staked on Boulder Gulch and Adams Gulch. Neither any good. But say, they've got Dawson a hot town." He laughed. "Game's running night and day, all the fun you want, but no gun play. The yellow legs will put you on a woodpile right away quick if ever you make a break. And it ain't no fun to be sawing wood at 40 below with a yellow legs and a Winchester standing over you, for the glory of the Queen of England." Frank Miller's mind was lapsing. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 12. A New Partner. Frank Corte stood at the door of his kitchen, and with a large smile eyed the coming of the party. The newcomers were evidently going to build their boat at the foot of Le Berge, and already he had favourably sized them up. There were many tents pitched around the cabin where Frank distributed the necessities of human sustenance; but Dude's instincts drew him to the kitchen, and down he and his canine followers flopped before the door. "Well, well! Fine dogs! Nice day, strangers! Going to build boat here?" "Yes, thought so. 30 Mile is open to the Hootalink, and the Lewis is getting holes in it. Early spring, sure." Frank's heart was hospitable, but the cost of grub was high. Moreover, the grub he cooked was not his. He was debating how far his hospitality could go. Frank Corte was a Hungarian by birth, and a citizen of the United States of America, which he proudly announced as opportunity offered. He was over 6 feet tall, with long arms, stooping shoulders, and an angular form. His physical strength was enormous. There was a wealth of native kindness in his heart. His chief diversion was argument, in which, thanks to his study of the Bible and a small, besmeared pocket edition of Webster's Dictionary, he was rather effective. He could argue with any one, or even on necessity address his convictions to the little red-haired female dog that was ever at his heels. Frank thought the world of Fanny. "Say, fellows, it's against orders to feed pilgrims, though I guess you ain't altogether tenderfeet, but if you wants to boil your tea and cook grub on my stove, you're welcome. Come right in and cook up." "No, thanks," said Hugh, "though I guess I will leave the team here and mooch round and get a good camping place. I guess we'll be here 3 weeks, and might as well set up our tent in a good place. We're not hungry." "That's right, and you can't have a better camping ground than right over against that bunch of spruce." Frank was interested in these strangers, and his desire for news stimulated his hospitality, so he continued, "Come right in and feed up, and look for your camping ground after. Days are getting long now." Hugh hesitated, and then accepted. Frank put on more wood, to which the tin stove quickly responded. "How's Soapy?" he inquired. "Fine," replied Hugh. "Hold-ups galore. The people of Skagway have a murder nearly every morning for breakfast. Say, what a time Soapy would have if they only let him operate around Dawson. Wouldn't he make a killing? But them police! They don't have any more excitement beyond the games and dance halls in Dawson than they do outside. That's no mining camp for a country like this, and the crowd what's inside there now. I don't like to see too much killing, but a hold-up now and again is interesting. Besides, these rich claim owners can stand it. A fellow was telling me that it was nothing to see the big moose coming into Dawson last summer with $10,000 or $20,000 tied to his saddle, and him without a guard. Say, we're going to have a squaw dance Friday night in the dining room here. Will you come? One of our fellows has an accordion and we'll have fine music. Only 4 bits a dance. I'm going to try and get some hooch. There's nothing like hooch to get the squaws on the move, if the yellow legs don't get on to it. They soak you like the devil if they catch you at it, though. Say, how's Uncle Sam getting on licking them there Spaniards? He'll do them up in about 3 weeks. I'd like to be outside to go to the Philippines. After he gets through with the Spaniards, he's going to come in and take Canada." And here Frank stole side glances at Hugh's companions; but his instincts of hospitality stayed him from this his favourite joke. "Say, where did you get those dogs? Fine team." "3 I got inside, the others in Skagway." "I thought you was no chechacho. You come from Uncle Sam's country, don't you?" "I come from all over. What's this outfit you're with?" "Jack Haskins is building 2 scows to take down some freight he hauled in over the ice. He has me cooking for him, though I could get $250 in Dawson for the same job. He only pays me $150 per month. But I'll soon be in with the best of them. Say, if you fellows is going to build a boat, I'll ask Jack if you can't use one of his pits. He has 2, and I guess you fellows can get the chance to use one of his pits for all the lumber you want, and that will save you building one. I'm glad you fellows have showed up. It will make more company. And I hope you'll come to our dance. You'll see the squaw camp down the river a bit. They're out from Dalton House, came out to Tagish, visiting some Siwashes there, and drifted down here, just to take in the sights. Are a bit shy, though some have picked up a little English." Here is another human study, thought John, as he and his friends moved over to the point suggested for their encampment. They found it satisfactory, so went back for the dogs. "Say, if you fellows want anything in the way of dishes, or if you're real short of any grub, maybe I can let you have it on the sly," said Frank to the party as they returned, his hospitality getting ahead of his morals. But Hugh assured him the party was fixed up all right. Frank's generosity was of the aggressive kind, for as John Berwick's party sat in their tent that evening he stuck his head in at the door and said they could have the use of one of Haskin's saw pits on the morrow, and probably right along. "Don't work too hard, for I want you to be lively on Friday night. 2 fellows have just blown in from Dawson, and they say the river is full of holes, so it is just as well you fellows don't have to build a pit. It looks like an early opening, maybe about the 1st of May." "The river won't open by the 1st of May, but it will before the 10th, most likely," commented Hugh. Next morning the party visited the yard where the scows were building, and introduced themselves to Mr. Haskins, who again informed them that the saw pits were at their disposal when he did not require them. "Ever do any whip sawing?" asked Haskins. "Some," said Hugh. "It's no picnic." "I never found it so. How's timber? That looks pretty good up the hill there," and Hugh pointed to a clump of spruce. "Yes, it's all right, but you'll find bigger and clearer stuff higher up, and you can mush it down the hill easy. I suppose you have your own saw?" With this the 3 friends stormed the hill. They were to cut the trees and slide them to the bottom, after which the dogs would aid in hauling them to the pit. The trees Hugh selected were the larger ones, clean and free from knots. By the close of the day sufficient logs were at the pit. A saw pit is a scantling of poles 8 feet high, on which the logs are placed to be sawn. The modus operandi is that one man stands below the log and another on the top. The upper man pulls the saw towards him, the lower man co-operates. The work is simplicity itself, but very hard. The 3 companions would want from 200 to 300 feet of lumber, which meant perspiration and backache. As Hugh expressed it, the upper man is up against about the hardest proposition a white man puts himself at these days. About 3 o'clock on the first afternoon of whip sawing, Frank Corte appeared with Fanny at his heels. George was the upper man, and even his elastic muscles were aching at the work. Hugh was having a spell off, but keeping an eye on his friends. "Ha! How do you fellows like hard work? This will teach you to go hunting after gold. What have you done with your last summer's wages? Say, we're going to have a great time at the dance, a regular potlatch. One of the sticks has just come in saying he's killed a caribou back on the hills and is going to potlatch it. Now, if I can only get some hooch, I'd give $10 a bottle for some." "Better cut the hooch out," said Hugh. "The police may catch you and send you down to Dawson, and put you sawing wood for Queen Victoria; and it won't be Uncle Sam's men who will be chasing you with a Winchester." "Yes, yes. A damn pity Uncle Sam would not come over and take Canada. Then we should have a camp at Dawson." George was very hot and sore, and this kind of bantering was new to him. He was in that humour which causes a man to go into a fight on little provocation, but John, he noticed, was smiling amicably, so he held his peace. "If this was Uncle Sam's country, Soapy would have been here taking away your wages before this," laughed Hugh. "I wouldn't kick it if you could do the trick. Say, can you dance? This is going to be a swell dance, all right. Wish I had enough lumber to cover the floor, so we could dance proper. Poles is mighty hard to dance on. Well, I must be going. I have some beans boiling. Don't you fellows tire yourselves too much sawing lumber so you can't dance tomorrow night." End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of the Great Gold Rush. A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush. A Tale of the Klondike by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 13. The Dance. "Are you all set? Then dance, damn you, dance! Come on, gentlemen, get partners for the next." Frank Corte's great dance was on. Hugh and his companions stood by the door of the dining hall. On went the dance, and through the atmosphere, thick with tobacco smoke, the native women were guided, their bronzed faces speaking excitement. "Come on in, gentlemen." The walls of the room were lined with men. Squaws, who had not yet learned the dance, sat on boxes. The 3 friends crowded into the room and stood with their backs against the wall. Frank Corte was beating time with his foot and clapping his hands, while he sang the calls in a weird drawl. "Honours to the right." Each man bowed most gravely to his partner, who most respectfully returned it. "Honours to the left." Each man bowed to the lady at his left in the quadrille. "Swing your right hand, lady, dance around the room" came. The men grabbed their partners and whirled around. Quarters were too close to permit any of the great range of movement, and the squaws were so excited they seemed to occupy more room than really they did. "Alamein left." All stood to attention. "First gent swing the left hand lady with the left hand round." Every gentleman turned towards the lady on his left. The ladies turned to the right. They grasped left hands at the height of their shoulders, and pranced round to the left. "The left hand round, turn your partners with the right hand round, the right hand round, all chassez, first couple lead to the right, forehand round, dos à belle net, right hand to partner, and grand dos à belle net." Every man took his partner's right hand and wheeled to the right, and then her left hand. This movement brought them opposite, and so they were in a circle, at which they balanced, the men facing outwards, the women inwards. "On to the next!" The men wheeled, and with their ladies pivoted to the left. Then the men took the hand of the ladies next on their right as they swung round. The ladies holding the men by the left gave their right hand, and at the words dos à belle net all again balanced, the men this time facing inwards, the ladies outwards. "On the next!" again brought the men facing outwards, the ladies inwards, and so on. The quadrille was concluded with "Promenade all around the hall, and seat your ladies at the ball." The faces of the crowd were wild with excitement. The music was weird and discordant. Yet John found it all very stimulating. Dance after dance was gone through, while he stayed and watched, till there came to his mind pictures of the old home, his father's house in London, and Alice Peel. Was she thinking of him? "Say, why don't you fellows get in and dance?" Dreams and fancies were reft away as reality, in the person of Haskins of the saw pits, stood before John Berwick. Then he noticed George laughing at a clumsy mystified squaw, a beginner in the dance. His hilarity provoked the squaw, and as the dance paused for a second, between her gasps and through her perspiration, she hissed with a look of contempt, "Che chaka!" "Say, you fellows will have to get in and dance in this next set. I saw a squaw looking at you and saying 'heap damn dude,' so if you want to keep your station in society you've got to dance." Haskins was again worrying them. "All right, who will I ask to dance?" George was ready. "Go and ask that squaw sitting in the corner," said Haskins, pointing across the room. She it was who had said "heap damn dude." George went and invited her to be his partner. "Ni kahalo introdux." "You have not been introduced," she answered. This was more than George could withstand in gravity. He roared with laughter and returned to Haskins. He only guessed the meaning of the words, so he repeated them to Haskins. "Who the devil has taught these savages up here Chinook? It's a special lingo manufactured by the Hudson Bay Company to suit the savages, and when white men first came into British Columbia they found the savages with a lingo which was called white man's wah-wah, and which no person could understand. It is easy enough to learn. You can pick it up in a week. It is only about 600 words. All the old-timers in British Columbia talk it. Dagoes, Chinese, Mexicans, Swedes, all talked it in the old days in Caribou. The Siwash calls an Englishman King George man, and an American Boston man. The squaw in the corner was keeping her eye on George with evident dislike. As John noticed this, he recommended their departure. So George and he went back to bed. Hugh arrived some hours later in great glee. "You fellows will laugh at the Siwashes, eh? Well, you'll get the worst of it. George, I hear you were not sufficiently formal with one of those klooches," that is squaws, "and got called down. Ha ha!" On the Sunday morning following, John left Hugh and George repairing their wardrobe in the tent, and was strolling past Frank Cort's kitchen to where the scows were being built. "Hullo, how's the heap damn dude? Come in, I want to argue with you." John looked up and saw the smiling face of Frank at his kitchen door. He had no great wish to argue, but he loved the study of humanity, and realized that Frank was something of a conundrum. Cort, who was kneading bread, took a seat on a box by the kitchen door. "Say, don't you think it would be a good thing for this country if Uncle Sam was really to come over and take it?" "I hope not. What's the matter with it as it is?" "Too much police, too much law and order. You can never have a real live mining camp in Canada." "Well, that was a pretty good dance you had Friday night." "Yes, it was all right. But what a time we would have had if we had had lots of hooch. But say, that was a good one, when the squaw told the other King George man he had not been introduced to her." Frank chuckled, and then, as the prospect of an international argument did not seem good, went on another tack. "Do you believe there is a God?" A flood of memories surged through Berwick's brain. He glanced at the dark sinister features of the man awaiting his reply, and then looked at the sunlight. Should he give such an answer in such a tone as would discourage further argument? No, the question was too serious. He might not have felt called upon at one time to divulge his belief, which in the past had been a burden of much questioning; but here it was asked, perhaps in levity, by one who evidently could not fully believe. He felt called upon to answer. "Yes, I do." Cort's face had taken on a strained look. Realizing the seriousness with which Berwick regarded the question, he feared lest he had hurt the feelings of his guest. The answer he received reassured him. Removing his big arms from the dough and gesticulating, he answered, "Well, partner, I don't. Now here's the proposition. Those who say there is a God say what he set out to do. The first thing God done was to build the world. And after he done this, he built a mighty fine ranch and fixed it all up A1. And then he puts Adam and Eve into it, after having made them. He tells them not to eat apples, and then he goes and has a snake which tells them to eat apples. And because they do eat apples, he pulls up the ranch and kicks them out. Now there would be no kicking coming if he simply turned them loose and made them rustle. Having to rustle never hurt any man, but he brings all sorts of diseases and pains on earth. That's what keeps me from believing in God. Now look here, if God was able to make the earth and the stars and everything, why should he not make man and let him enjoy all this, seeing that he is doing it all more or less for amusement, without putting him in the middle of a lot of good things and then putting up a job on him? I've talked to parsons on this thing, and some of them says that after he bust up the home ranch, he kind of got sorry and says he would send his son on earth to die, to fix up the big mistake Adam and Eve made in eating one apple. Now say, if you was doing all this, would you, after you made man, and put him on the earth, and he did wrong, would you send your son to fix things up so that the crowd would go and nail him to a big wooden cross by driving big stakes through his hands and feet, and then stick him up for the crows to peck at? If God was not able to make a man the first go-off who would stand a mill test, why did he not kill him off, body and soul, and try again without trying to fix things up by making his son suffer? The whole proposition ain't natural. And what would you think of a man who, if he fell down on any proposition, would make his son go and suffer to fix up his mistakes? Why did he not come on earth and die on the cross himself, and suffer and turn the earth and all the stars and the rest of it over to his son to run while he was gone? John Berwick was not by nature argumentative, having seldom in his life allowed himself to be drawn into any but political controversy. He had, it is true, discussed doctrine at college with his classmates. He had read much philosophy, and had pondered deeply on the mystery of human suffering, the deepest of all mysteries. He had weighed the arguments of great minds which wanted belief in God, and in his own mind had done much to surmount the difficulty, to justify the ways of God to man. But the crude intellect before him had launched forth a proposition he could not confute. His training in rhetoric and in the drawing of parallels was of use only against the cultured mind. The legend of the Saxon king drawing the simile of life from the little bird which flew within the hall firelight and was gone again came to his mind, but he put it aside as impotent. He did not know what to say. He said nothing. Frank Corte was working at his bread again, his face twitching with a smile. And then there's mosquitoes and black flies and moose flies and bulldogs. Say, wait a month or two till the mosquitoes get busy, and then try and figure out how any great and good God would put such things on earth. These devils ain't in cities where men is, but in the country where the beasts is. Have you ever seen a big bull moose goin' hell-bent for election through the bush, chased by flies? Have you ever shot a bear with his eyes and ears and nose full of flies, and the flies sticking all round his eyes, enough to drive even a bear plumb crazy? Why should God, because man went and eat an apple, make animals suffer in trying to get even? Frank Corte returned to the kneading, while John Berwick thoughtfully watched the sun-flooded landscape. "Frank," he said after a pause, "the proof of the pudding is the eating. I have never heard any argument quite like yours, but man's coming to the world, how he came to the world, and whether he has a soul have been the greatest subjects of study through the ages. We know the Christian religion was taught back to within a few years of the time Christ came on earth, and from that time on has got bigger in power and influence over the minds of men, so that the majority of civilized people give justice to their fellows because this religion tells them to do so. The Bible tells a story of the origin of man, which we may or may not believe. The Bible says there is a God, and God sees best not to explain his schemes and why he makes man and animals suffer. I believe there is a God, but that God is just, and that God is just, and that there is a reason for everything. Why not try to believe there is a God, rather than argue with yourself and others that there is no God? If the Christian belief has made the world so much better as a whole, it will make you and me better as single men. And I know you would give a man a meal if he wanted it, or if a fellow were sick you would help him out all you could, and you'd expect me to do the same. If you saw a fellow drowning in the river, you'd help him out. But the Chinaman, who is not a Christian, would let him drown. You're a Christian all right, but you don't know it." John paused and would have added something, but Frank, his face half flushed in confusion, his voice less rasping than usual, broke in. "Say, stranger, when I first saw you, I sized you up along with the Siwashes as a heap damned dude, though I didn't like to say it serious like. But that's a pretty good talk of yours, and sure, sounds natural. Say, is that other King George man with you as good a fellow as you are? Say, you've set me thinking." Frank had set Berwick thinking too. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 14. A Long Shot. Hugh Spencer was working as upper man on the whipsaw, and an Indian was trying to extract a cartridge from an old and rusty rifle at his camp down the river. Suddenly there was a report, and Hugh tumbled headlong from his position. His friends sprang to his side, and found blood spurting from a hole in his neck. The flow was not great, so that their first feeling of horror was changed to hopefulness. John shouted and waved to Haskins, whom he saw standing near his scows. Haskins came running up, was told what had happened, and with the single word, "Wait," bolted to his tent. He was back again in little more than a minute, with a camp bed, blankets and all. Few words were spoken, and those in whispers. The injured man was lifted on to the bed and carried to the tent, his temporary home. "George, hot water." George was off to the cook tent at the word, while Haskins got Hugh on his side, the wound uppermost, and Frank arrived hurriedly. "Boracic acid out of the medicine bag. Frank, you light the fire, and then take off Hugh's boots." "It don't look as if it was bad," said Haskins, when the wound was washed. "No," replied John, "I don't think the bullet is far in. It is the shock that has knocked him out. But I have no instruments with which to get the bullet out, and even if I were able to draw it out, it might be followed by a rush of blood I should not know how to stop, and then there is the danger of blood poisoning." "A doctor with his partner is building a boat at White Horse," said Haskins. "Good, I'll get him. George, you know what to do. Keep a good watch, and when he comes round keep him quiet." John left the tent and saw 4 of the dogs before Frank's kitchen. "See anything of Dude?" he called to Frank. "Yes, he was in front of my kitchen all the afternoon." Frank looked out of the tent door. "Say, I've left my door open. I bet he stole something." They ran to look. "Yes, a side of bacon's gone. Damn that Dude! Heap damn Dude, he!" Frank's sense of humour could not be suppressed by any calamity, but its expression did not stay his activities. He was out of his kitchen and peering into the bushes on the hillside. "Yes, I thought so. There he is. Been up to his cache I located the other day. He's done quick work and is coming back. Don't call him, he'll come quicker without, and he may think we want to lick him for thieving. Come inside." It seemed an age before the reprobate reappeared before the cabin. "Don't let on you see him, but walk by and grab him," whispered Frank. John followed the instructions and was successful. "Where's the harness?" asked Frank. "With the sleigh at the tent. I'll get it." "Here, 2 bits. Here, 4 bits. Here, Tom, Jerry." And Frank had the team in harness. "Dude." Dude went to his place in the lead. "Hold on a minute." Frank went into the kitchen, and returned with half a loaf of bread and some fried bacon in a piece of birch bark. "Throw this into you as you go." "How about the dogs?" "Damn the dogs, I've been feeding them all day." "Mush." Dude looked back and did not move. "Mush." He moved ahead at a slow walk. "Mush, damn you!" John felt surprised to hear himself swear, but the dogs were in the condition styled ornery. Duke turned in by the side of the building, the others followed. The sleigh bumped against the corner. Frank had Dude by the collar in a moment, and was belabouring him over the flank with a stout stick. The hills reverberated with howls. He hauled the animals back into line, and with a kick for good measure, said in a cold, slow tone, "Mush!" Dude trotted off. Frank ran by the side of the team till they were on the lake. "They'll go all right if you once get them away from camp, but lick 'em good and plenty if they turn mean," was his counsel on quitting. John Berwick was alone with the team on the great expanse of Lake Le Berge. Before him, to the south, lay the 30-mile stretch of ice, flanked by rolling hills, flooded with opalescent tints and peace. For an instant the exceeding beauty of the scene gladdened his mind. He was anxious about Hugh. There were 45 miles to traverse before he would come to White Horse. The dogs were travelling at 5 miles an hour, 9 hours before they could reach White Horse, and then, if the river were open, what then? The thought of the delay necessitated by a journey overland staggered him. It were easier to travel 30 miles on the ice than 15 through the bush. He jumped off the sleigh and ran, but the dogs moved no faster, and the labour in running would soon exhaust him, for while there was no snow on the ice, the surface of the lake was a coarse ice sand, which constituted a poor foothold. The sun was setting, already a chill was in the air. A crust would form within the hour, perhaps the dogs would move faster then. These thoughts ran through his mind, till his fear developed into a lingering dread. He realized that to go through that intolerable process of analyzing the details of his anxiety could only result in futility. The surface of the lake became harder. He picked up pieces of ice, threw them at Dude, and shouted. Every missile with its accompanying shout brought a merely temporary increase of speed. All attempts to get the dogs to gallop proved futile. It was 3 o'clock on the following morning when Berwick pounded on the door of the police cabin at Whitehorse, and was greeted sleepily. He entered. The flicker of a match showed a man in the act of lighting a candle by the head of a bed built against the wall. Man shot at the foot of l'auberge, bullet in his neck, wants doctor. The policeman jumped from bed, slipped to the door, and pointed to a tent by the riverside. The doctor with his partner live in that tent. What is it, accident? Yes, Indian trying to extract a cartridge from an old rifle. Damn the Siwashes! Same old story. Well, I have no doubt the doctor will go. I guess you'll need some sleep, so if those fellows can't put you up, return here, and you can climb into bed with me." John had intended returning to his friend with the doctor, but bolted without comment, save a mere "thank you." There is no process of knocking at a tent door, so John used his voice to rouse the occupants. "What do you want?" was the gruff response. John gave the necessary information. "Doc," then said the man to his unseen companion, "there's a chance of doing the Good Samaritan act the preachers talk about." There was silence for a while as the doctor and his comrade were dressing and preparing. Then John asked, "Can I build a fire outside and cook some dog feed? If you will let me have some feed I'll return it, or pay for it." "I thought you was a chechacho," said the gruff voice. "You want the doc to travel quick?" "Certainly. And the doc's taken them dogs home?" "Yes." "Well, don't feed them." John Berwick's nature revolted against this theory, but he made no protest, as the life of his mate was in jeopardy. The doctor packed his handbag and was ready. "You stay here," he said. "You can do no good down there. Roll in and have a sleep." Dude was alert, but the other dogs were in repose when they were jerked into life again. The train moved down the river. Fatigued in body and mind, Berwick gladly rested and slept. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 15. Revelation. John awoke at 5 in the afternoon. At the first opportunity his new acquaintance began to talk. "My name's Jim Godson. Shorty, the boys call me. Sometimes Long Shorty. That's what you call a blooming paradox, ain't it, parson?" "I'm not a parson." "Well, if you ain't, you look as if you ought to be. What's your name?" "Oh, is it? Ain't you got no appellation yet?" "Not as yet." "Well, I'll call you Parson Jack, though I guess you look too good a man for a parson. Parsons is mostly parsons because they's too lazy to work, and you don't act lazy. No, you ain't lazy, not if you're in tow with an old timer." Godson's light chatter kept away the sense of apprehension which was ever tending to creep into Berwick's mind. "Say, I knew a parson once that was worth having." "Yes, sir. Father Pat was his name, and his run was down in the Kootenays. A whiter parson never lived than Father Pat." "Father Pat? Was he a Roman Catholic? The Roman clergy are not called parsons." "No, sir, he weren't no Catholic. He was an Anglican, and a pretty acute one, too. He was moseying along a trail down below one day, and was just turning off on a side trail leading to a mining proposition up there, when 3 fellows met him, who were just naturally full of cussedness. 'How do?' says Father Pat. 'Where are you going?' says the fellows. 'I'm going up to the mine,' says Father Pat. 'No, you ain't,' says the fellows. 'But I am,' says Father Pat. 'We don't want no damn parsons around here,' says the fellows. 'I can't help that,' says Father Pat. 'I'm going up the hill, and if you fellows want to quarrel over it, I'll take you one at a time and lick you.' And he did so. Now that's what I call a parson worth having." "And which of the 3 were you?" asked John. "Me? I was the second fellow that got licked. Yes, since then I've always thought parsons worth looking into." The time for departure came. Go easy for the first 2 or 3 miles, parson. 45 miles is a pretty good walk for any fellow who ain't an old timer. You're making a mistake not waiting, for the dogs will be back here with the doctor, even if he has to stay a day or two with your partner. But if you're stuck on going, I guess I ain't got any string on you." "Good-bye," said John, and clambered down the river bank to the ice. The day had been more than usually warm, the air unusually clear, the evening frost had come early. As Berwick left Whitehorse it was 7, and already the crust had formed. He had food in his pockets, and the air brought him stimulation. Anxiety steeled his muscles. Away he strode. He passed from the curving river, and came again to the frozen stretch of Lake Le Berge. The light of day was gone, the stars gleamed and danced, and shed their glamour over the hills. And what dignity they held! Greece had risen and gone to decay. Caesar had striven after his great ambition. Pharaoh had succeeded Pharaoh, while those hills had slept as they now were sleeping. The influence of his environment closed upon John Berwick. The psychic force of the weird Northland was upon him. Through his mind passed the orthodox story of creation, and again as he walked he weighed the various arguments of the agnostic. He looked upon the limestone masses to the east, and mused upon the ways of nature, which caused the destruction of myriads of shellfish to upbuild the marble of the palace. He pictured the diamond in the atomic theory of matter, a mass of pulsating atoms oscillating within magnetic bonds, even as the stars swing through space, guided by the influence which is called gravitation. Was not this known movement of the heavenly bodies similar to the theoretic movement of the atom? A feeling of apprehension grew in John Berwick. Faster and faster he walked. Life's greatest problems had for years occupied his mind. He looked about him and into the heavens. Before his fevered eyes the stars shimmered and grew in shape. The earth beneath him dwindled and melted, till it was but a star, and he felt its rush through space. He realized the centrifugal force that would throw the world out of its orbit. He felt the counteracting restraint. System joined to system, swinging, circling, driving. The universe grew about him. Suns and stars were but atoms in a component whole. The whole formed into presence. Love! God! It came to him as a mighty, magnificent discovery. He must hurry to tell Frank Corte. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 16. A Stream of History. "Good-bye, fellows. Wish you all kinds of luck. I won't be long behind you." "Good-bye," answered the four from the boat that glided out on the swift waters of 30 Mile River. In the bow stood Hugh Spencer, bandaged. At the oars were Bruce and Frank Corte. In the stern John Berwick, pale and weak from his late fever, was resting. A new light shone in his eyes. The lines of his face were softened. Anxieties which had been as a weight on his soul had been removed by that revealing walk, which had ended in catastrophe. He had been found by the side of the trail some few hours after he had fallen in delirium. The legs of his trousers were worn at the knees. His flesh was cut through his struggling after he had fallen. His finger tips were worn to the quick. His blood had stained the ice. The doctor, returning, had been John's rescuer, and had placed him on the sleigh. Truly a good Samaritan, he had returned with the invalid to the foot of Le Berge. Berwick's delirium was the climax of half a dozen years of mental strain. His old struggle as to whether he should make his vocation in the Church, as well as his almost hopeless passion for Alice Peel, had, though even George Bruce barely suspected it, wrought upon him. Now the climax had come, and was past. George, seeing this catastrophe, had guessed much. The doctor, trained in the study of humanity, had also guessed something. Hugh, Frank Corte, and Haskins only knew that John had played out on the trail. Spencer had told his companions there was nothing much in the first 6 miles of the river, but that afterwards she is swift and crooked. Sunken boulders were the chief danger, so he took his post in the bow to "read the water ahead," and to direct the course, saying Frank or George, as he wished the one or the other to pull the harder. After an hour the boat came to a point where the river takes a turn to the right, on rounding which the boat's pace increased. Looking over its side into the clear water, John saw the stones at the bottom flash by, and noted the scurrying greyling affrighted. The boat swept by sunken boulders, or grazed the curving shores, but held its swift course without pause or incident. For 4 hours their rapid progress continued, then the current died away, and the boat floated upon the dead water that marks the junction of the Hootalinquia River with the 30 Mile, henceforth to be called the Lewis, till Lewis is joined by the Pelly to become the Yukon. Now that the necessity for vigilance was past, Hugh entertained his friends with reminiscences of his first trip there, and the story of the entrance of the gold seekers to the upper Yukon. They would soon be at Cassiar Bar, and the mouth of the Big Salmon River. In 1881 miners had crossed the passes, and descended the lakes and rivers to the mouth of the Big Salmon, which they ascended, and obtained gold by washing the bars. Cassiar Bar was not discovered till 1886, 5 years after the Big Salmon party had done their mining. The men who mined Cassiar Bar had wintered here, and their cabin came in useful for others who "mushed out" over the ice to give word about Howard Franklin's discovery of coarse gold on the 40 Mile, and to order more grub to be sent up river by the Alaska Commercial Company's steamer. In 1880 some fellows from Sitka had gone over, and prospected up the Hootalinquia. But they did not strike much, while the first white man over the passes looking for gold was George Holt, who found a few "colours" around Lake Bennett. In 1873 Arthur Harper and a British Columbia outfit came up the Liard over the Divide. But though they found prospects almost everywhere in the Yukon, they did not make a real strike, so they floated to the mouth of the Yukon and went to work for the Alaska Commercial Company. Hugh thus told the history of Yukon, so far as the white man knows it. Although the ice still clung along the river banks, the land was free of snow, and vegetable life was asserting itself. The mosquito was very little behind the grass shoot in realizing that summer was at hand, and that it had but a few short months in which to play its part. It was because sleep on shore would be difficult, through the mosquitoes, that Hugh suggested their continuing the journey through the night. One watched and steered while the others slept. So Hugh, George, and Frank divided the night between them. John asserted that the rest and change of scene had done him a world of good, and that he was able to steer, but the others squashed his proposals. "Heap damn dude, heap sick all same, baby, he he," sniggered Frank Corte. They had now dropped away from the great mountains. Not a snow-topped peak was in sight, but the hills stretched majestically on either side of the river. The routine of watches having been decided, the party settled down to silence at 9 o'clock. Towards midnight John awoke. It was now merging upon the season of perpetual light, and the hills and the great river were weirdly visible. George was on watch, sitting on the thwart ahead of him, his back towards him. The boat quietly, swiftly glided on. No effort was needed from the man at the lookout, save an occasional stroke to keep the head straight. John glanced at his watch and saw the hour. The fact startled him, though he had schooled himself. In the lands where his previous existence had been passed, the haunts of men were always at this hour illuminated by artificial light, and filled with artificiality. Here was the opening of the month's long day, and reality, reality, the eternal verities. In that wonderful silence he needs must think, and overhaul his spiritual condition. He could and he would take holy orders. He would first fight the issue in the goldfields, for if he made money that power would be useful. So he came to his decision, and at last he slept. When he awoke, the boat was hauled half-way up one of the Yukon's many islands, and breakfast was being cooked. The party had travelled 100 miles in 24 hours. 3 days more would carry them to Dawson. They re-embarked, and as the same glorious weather prevailed, their expedition was very like a delightful picnic. In the regions of Tantalus Buttes the river took a number of great horseshoe bends, which induced Hugh to remark, "We do a lot of travelling here, without much progress." Then came Five Finger Rapids, where 4 great pillars of conglomerate rock stood ranged across the river. The Yukon's waters were low. The season of freshets was not due until the snow in the mountains was melted and the sun had attacked the glaciers. So Hugh said the main or right-hand channel might be run. "Run her right up on the top of the crest," he ordered. They approached the rapid, and the current slackened almost to dead water. They rowed the boat under the cliff to the right of the channel, and then shot out into the middle, directly on the crest. The current caught the little craft. There was a swish and swirl of water. She heaved, and was over the cataract into the dancing waters beyond. The current remained swifter than it had been above the rapids, and the party was soon at Rink Rapids, 4 miles beyond Five Fingers. This rapid was more dangerous than that of the Five Fingers had been. owing to its being spread over a wide range of bottom and to the presence of numerous boulders. However, they shot the boat under the right bank and glided through in safety. There now remained uninterrupted, smooth water to Dawson. They breakfasted at Fort Selkirk, situated on the left bank of the river, opposite the mouth of the large tributary, the Pelly. Frank protested that a day's rest would do the party good, particularly a dance that night, for there was a squaws' camp near. "You will get all the dancing you have money to pay for in Dawson," said Hugh. As the party were again afloat, Hugh pointed across the river and remarked, "Back at that bunch of bush are the ruins of old Fort Selkirk, which Robert Campbell built for the Hudson Bay Company in the year 1849. In 1852 the Chilkats burnt it down, because it was cutting off their trade with the savages hereabouts. You see, before the Hudson Bay fellows got in here, the Chilkats, who held the passes to the sea, used to give inside Indians most nothing for their furs, and sell them at a big profit to the white traders on the coast. The Chilkats would not let the inside Indians out to the coast to trade for themselves. Well, when the Hudson Bay Company showed up, it broke up the cinch the Chilkats thought their own, and they came after the company. The Indians then hereabouts, the Wood Indians, got hold of the plans of the Chilkats and kept watch. But they let up for a few days, and the Chilkats came into the fort and told the officers they had to get. It was a groundhog case, so they just naturally got. Campbell found the local Indians and came back, but the Chilkats had cleaned out. The tea, tobacco, and sugar they took away with them, and what they couldn't take they cached. The Chilkats didn't offer to do murder, though they are up to most anything. One thing they took away with them was the company's flag, which the Chilkats keep at Kluckwan, their village on the Chilkat River, which lies in the valley just over the mountains west of Skagway. The Chilkats are very proud of their King George man flag. It was on August 21st the fort was seized, so Campbell had to do something right away, quick, before the winter set in. So after going down the Yukon to White River, where he met the remainder of his men, who had been to Fort Yukon and were coming back, he told them to go back down the river and winter at Fort Yukon, and he lit out up the Pelly and over the Divide to the Liard, and down the Liard to Fort Simpson. When he got there, the Liard was running bank full of ice. The next place that drew reminiscences from Hugh was the mouth of Stewart River. Here was a police post, with a few cabins. In 1885, 30 miles up the Stewart, the first considerable bar diggings was struck. Dick Popham was up there in 1884, but he did not find anything. Water was too high. Frank Densmore and Johnny Hughes brought to Juneau in the fall of 1885 the news of good gold on the Stewart, and in 1886 the gang went in, about 300. Along with the gang went George Carmack, but he took up with the Siwashes on the Chilkoot. You see, when the fellows started in first, the Siwashes packed from what is now Dia to Lindeman for 9 cents a pound. But as the boys were in a hurry, prices rose to 30 cents. But this was too much for Carmack, who was a Missourian. Besides, he got stuck on a squaw. I guess he must have stayed with the Siwashes ever since, travelling among them and living their life till he made the big strike on Bonanza, which started this here stampede. When the boys got to the Stewart diggings, in 1886, they found them good all right, but not enough to go around. So a lot of them lit out down the river, away below Fort Yukon, to try some prospects reported from there. Among the bunch was Bill Hartz, Webfoot the boys called him, because he came from Oregon. Well, those boys tried to lower diggings and found them no good. So Webfoot started back up the river on Jack McQuestion's steamer called the New Racket. Jack McQuestion was trading in the country then, with Arthur Harper and Al Mayo as partners. He was in the country before Harper, and used to work for the Hudson Bay Company on the Mackenzie. At this time they had 4 posts, one at Fort Selkirk, one at Stewart River, one just below Dawson, and one about where Eagle City now is. There was a big mountain there called by Harper Teetotalim. At Teetotalim there was a queer sort of fellow from back east in Canada, a Frenchman, who was always fooling round with bits of rock and talking about how the mountains were made. One day a Siwash blew in with a piece of woolly rock which the Frenchman said was asiabestos, and if there was much of it, it would be worth money. So McQuestion sent out Webfoot with a grubstake to find the place. Webfoot did not find the asiabestos, but he found gold on the 40 Mile, as also did Howard Franklin, who was sent up the 40 Mile from its mouth by McQuestion. They came back out, and on up the Yukon to winter at Stewart. Next year the fellows left Stewart for the 40 Mile, and George Matlock, Billy Leake, Oscar Ashley, and Percy Walker found Matlock Bar, with coarse gold which washed down out of Franklin Gulch. Franklin Gulch was found in August 1887. This was the first really coarse gold found in the Yukon, and the best discovery up to that time. While the boys were wintering at Stewart, grub got short, and Harper passed it round, fair and square, not raising the price any. But one day some stuff was stole, and Harper told the boys, who called a miners' meeting right off. The boys appointed a committee to go round and search the cabins, for every fellow was glad enough to clear himself by showing everything he had. Nothing was found, and then the boys thought of two fellows, Missouri Bill and Arkansas Frank, who lived down the river a bit, and when they struck a fresh trail leading to and from their cabin, they became mighty interested, and when they saw where they had made a fire, and found half burnt up staves of a butter firkin, they got real hot. When they got up to the cabin, the door opened, and the two fellows came out, one of them, Missouri Bill, with a Winchester in his hands, swearing he would shoot the first man who came a step further. This stopped the boys for a bit, but Frank Morfitt got a rope off a sleigh and slipped round the back of the cabin. The first thing Missouri Bill knew, he had a rope round his neck, and the game was up. Well, the boys didn't want to hang them, so each of the fellows gave them a handful of beans or a little rice, and told them to get, thinking that mushing out 500 miles and breaking trail all the way was pretty nearly as bad as hanging. They made the trip all right, but it was only because they met some Siwashes. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 17. Dawson. Being in the vanguard of the multitude, whose rush to the diggings in the following year was the outstanding feature of the history of the Klondike, the Dawson that John Berwick and his companions found was that of the winter of '97, very different from the city of 5,000 tents it was to become 2 months after their arrival. An hour before midnight, when they arrived, Hugh had pointed out a high hill, Dawson's Dome, placed beyond the mouth of the Klondike River, or, as it was called before usage corrupted its name, the Thronduik. Little did he or his companions dream of the part this dome was to play in the events yet to be. The dome was to become historic. The main portion of Dawson was built on the north side of the Klondike. It was a scene of much movement and business. Pack trains were passing up and down the streets, and innumerable dogs seemed everywhere. Few boats had yet arrived, and a group of loafers gathered to watch them land. One fellow shouted, "I'll give you $1 apiece for any late papers you have." Now that they were at the Klondike capital, the natural impulse of the party was to enjoy whatever amusements were available. So, in spite of their being tired, and the hour late, they drew the boat upon the gravel shore. Passing between tents, they came to the mire of the main thoroughfare. The atmosphere and circumstance of the goldfields were all about them. There were pack horses and pack mules waiting before the shops. Men were hurrying in and out with pack straps on their backs. Even the dogs wore saddle bags, a good dog being able to pack 40 pounds of supplies. Other dogs passed drawing a cart, on which were half a dozen cans, oil tins filled with water, dispensed at 25 cents the tin. The festive side of life was more marked than the commercial. Men in wild attire, women in gorgeous raiment, were ever passing in and out of the saloons and gambling halls. The four adventurers floundered across the mud and entered the hospitable doors of the Borealis. This was a saloon and dance hall combined, but a roulette wheel and faro layout invited to play. It was the interval between the dances when they entered, and a loud voice was calling, "Come along, gentlemen, pretty ladies here, just in over the ice. The next dance will be a waltz." Frank Corte, ever the squire of dames, made a dive for the rear of the hall, and was soon leading one of the gorgeous creatures into the dizzy whirl. The partners from the last dance were crowding the bar, ordering drinks. As each man paid his $2, his lady was handed a cheque. This cheque was redeemable for $1, the girl's source of revenue. The orchestra was good, but the male section of the dancers was certainly grotesque. Many of the men, with sombreros on their head and cigars between their teeth, were floundering through the dance in a half intoxicated condition, their great hobnailed boots almost drowning the music with their noise. The three others soon left Frank to his diversions, and passed out to the street. They saw a policeman, with whom, in the way of such a free and easy community, they fell into talk. "What's the chance of getting a claim?" they asked. "Don't know. They're having stampedes right along, and any time you may hear of good pay being located on a creek. When news like this gets out there is a big rush by all classes, and you're lucky if you get anywhere near discovery. If you want work, they're paying $10 per day and board on the creeks for shovelling in, so I guess you need not starve." Hugh, with his mind on the immediate necessities of the party, asked, "Where is a good place to locate?" "Up on the bench on the north side of the Klondike over there." The policeman pointed south east. "You can get wood handy, and the water is good." "What's the matter with pitching our tent where we landed?" "Among the outfit along the waterfront? No, they are the soreheads and general kickers. You don't want to tie to them. Most of them have lived in these tents all winter, and had nothing to do but dream of what some other fellow has done them out of, and how much better things would be if they had struck it rich instead of Macdonald or Carmack. No, you fellows pole upstream to morrow to the Klondike, and then up that stream half a mile. Pack your grub to the top of the hill there, where you can live like white men." "That sounds reasonable, but we want to sleep now." "Well, go to Flanagan's bunk house up the street," and the man pointed up a turning running at right angles to the main street. "He will give you beds at $1 each." "Our boat and things will be all right?" "Good night, and thanks." When the three visited the boat next morning they found a man standing on the bank, his legs, encased in rubber boots coming up to his hips, far apart, hands in the pockets of his overalls, a sombrero on the back of his head. Hugh noticed the smile of good natured cynicism on his face as he regarded the boat, and said, "Queer, ain't it? And they say there are thousands more coming." "Yes, 50,000 more coming in, and me waiting for a chance to get out." "I wonder what makes them do it?" "Same thing as made me do it." "Didn't you get a chance to stake anything?" "Stake anything? How long have you been in the country? Say, is that your boat?" "Yes." "Well, take my tip and just get in it and keep right on going till you strike St. Michael's." "For what reason would we do that?" "Don't you know they have a government in this country? Well, that's the reason: officials and graft. Stake a claim and they rob you of it. No, sir, no more British mining camps for me. I'm for the good old state of Washington. If this camp was in Alaska a fellow could hold down what was his with a shotgun, but here you daren't make a break. Law and order, hell! Grafters appointed by the law, and the law to see no fellow interfere with the grafters. We'd shoot the whole bunch if we had them on the other side." "We intend to stake claims, and we intend to hold them." "You do, eh? Well, I bet you won't. You fellows should have brought your nurse girls with you to teach you the ABC." The party was then joined by Frank, the habitual smile on his face; but his eyes were heavy. "Cost me $50," he said. "You got off easy. Better get in and cook breakfast to wake you up. We haven't eaten yet, and meals uptown cost $2.50. Say, if you fellows want to, you can use my tent and things, but I have no grub to give away." This invitation from the new found pessimist was accepted, and Frank went to work cooking while their host let loose his opinions on life. He told them how the manager of a great trading company had the autumn before addressed the crowd, prophesying famine through the winter, and exhorting all to leave the place by the only avenue of escape, the river, then filling with ice. It was a dismal picture enough, but happily worse than the reality. He spoke well of the police, and praised the way they had rushed the mail in and out with dog teams. "And it ain't their fault there is so much grafting; they don't graft themselves." He told of the fabulous wealth of El Dorado, Bonanza, and Hunker Creeks, and of Alec MacDonald, the "Big Moose," estimated to be worth $26,000,000. He expatiated at length on the irregularities of the Gold Commissioner's office, the iniquitous orders in council from Ottawa, such as the imposition of 10% royalty on the production of the creeks, and the reserving to the Crown of every alternate claim on Dominion Creek, of all other creeks on which new discoveries might have been made, and of the hillside claims. Frank, with his Yankee predilections, was ready to believe anything bad of Canada, and chuckled at the account. John and George, though they had had experience of official corruption in Australia, thought the accounts fantastic, and could not believe such things possible in British dominions. "The Gold Commissioner is not in the graft. He's honest, but he's like a baby, and the gang play with him as they like." Breakfast over, the party set out, and in an hour had poled and tracked the boat half a mile up the Klondike. They passed under a crude suspension bridge, and saw 2 ferries and innumerable boats plying across the river. Hugh noticed a break or draw in the cliff, marked by a trail that led to the bench on which the party was to locate, and stopped the boat. "Get out the axes, fellows, and Frank, you pack the tent up the hill. It will make you think of what you have done with your last winter's wages. John, you're the honoured guest, you're going to boss the job." Berwick, without any load, found the climb to the top of the hill sufficiently exhausting, as he was not yet fully recovered. After Frank had thrown down the tent, Hugh unlashed it, and spread it in the sun, folded one end to make a pillow, and told John to lie upon it. And then he addressed his partners. "Look here, fellows, one thing is certain. Whatever we do as regards prospecting and taking up claims, we want a home camp as a sort of headquarters, and we might as well make it here and now. We need not bother building a cabin, but we can put up a wall of logs the size of the tent, and put the tent on top. This will do till the fall, by which time we will all be millionaires, except Frank here, unless he quits dancing. Now we'll pack up the rest of the outfit. Come on, boys." By 4 o'clock their new habitation was completed. 2 beds were built, and the little stove erected inside the tent. Frank had an early supper and went to bed. The others built a camp fire outside to keep away the flies, and discussed mining far into the night. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W.H.P. Jarvis. Chapter 18. Pooh Bah. During the days of his convalescence, John Berwick spent many hours roaming about the bluff, indulging his passion for the sights of nature, and thinking, quite without panic now, of the infinite problems associated with human existence in a universe governed by an inscrutable providence. Much of his thought, too, naturally turned to the girl he had left behind him. His illness and these afterthoughts had taught him lessons, and given him hopes. In the steep ascent one day of the bench on the south side of the Klondike, John came up with a tottering figure bent under a heavy load. The man was old, and the temptation came to John, invalid as he was, to offer to relieve him of the burden for a bit. When the man sat down to rest, and wiped away the perspiration with a much soiled red handkerchief, John sat down near him. But for a time he paid no attention to him, or to any of the passers-by. "It's a nice day," John began. "It's only chechachoes that talk about the weather," was the blunt reply. "I'm a chechacho." "Don't have to tell me that. What in hell are you fellows coming here for?" "To stake a claim and get rich." "Pooh Bah will get it." "Pooh Bah? Pooh Bah of the Mikado?" "This ain't the Mickey Do's Pooh Bah. This is the Octopus's Pooh Bah. He's got the Mickey Do and the Tsar of Russia skinned to death. Pooh Bah comes pretty near running things in Dawson. If you stake a claim and go to Pooh Bah and give him half interest, you may get a grant for it. That is, if Pooh Bah can't find any person to run it for him. Then again, he may think he wants it all himself, in which case you can go to hell. If you wants to start manufacturing hooch, just go to Pooh Bah, and he will fix things so as you won't be touched." "But are you sure? This is British territory." "British nothing! This is the Octopus's country, and him and Pooh Bah is old friends. Fellows tell me Pooh Bah helped elect the Octopus back east to Parliament, or whatever you Britishers call your government layout. Look at this royalty they are putting on our gold. How much of this here royalty ever gets to Queen Victoria? No, sir, I bet Sir Wilfrid Laurier never gets his hands on one half of what's robbed from us poor devils." "But the expenses of government must be raised, and you must admit that you have good law and order, and that you never get held up." "Held up? Law and order? Hell! What's the difference between being held up by fellows like the Soapy Smith gang or being held up by the bloomin' Yellow Legs? You have some chance of getting clear of Soapy Smith, and it's only a matter of time till some fellow takes a shot at 'em, but you can't get past the Yellow Legs. They won't stand for no bluffs." "The government will build roads." "Roads? Then why ain't they building them? No, the government says Pooh Bah will build them, and has given Pooh Bah a franchise to charge fellows going up Bonanza Creek trail 25 cents apiece, and for each pack animal $2.50. Pooh Bah started to build the road all right, but he quit just as soon as he got the toll gate up.
What do you think I'm climbing this 2,000 feet for? Mountain scenery, same as you're doing? No, it's a mighty sight easier to climb this blooming hill than to wade through Poo Bah's bog holes. The Bonanza Trail makes the Slough of Despond look like the rocky road to Dublin. But say, I must be getting. You're away from the land of dukes and earls and kings and queens and all that brand of cattle, and you'd better turn white man with a new set of notions in your head. Let me carry your load a little way. Go on. I ain't dead yet. It serves me right for getting caught in a country ruled by a government my fathers bled to get rid of, about the time of the Boston Tea Party. The old man struggled into his harness again. God, I wished I was back again under Old Glory. John shrank under the insult. Tears came to his eyes. What soul cherishing the honour of British institutions would not have protested at such a state of things as his eyes were daily being opened to? Sadness came over him. Here was a great injustice, and sordid, festering corruption inspired by greed. He gritted his teeth, and a resolve came to him. If he found these stories true, he would strive somehow, anyhow, to overthrow Poo Bah and his clique of corruption. After a while, John again came up to the old man resting by the side of the trail, who blurted out, "I thought I had given you enough to send you out of the country." "Then you didn't. Tell me this. Are you aware of any case of a miner being cheated out of his claim?" "Yes, lots. There's my own, for one." "Where and how was that?" The old man was not disinclined to talk. "Well, stranger, it was this way. Me and my partner staked a claim on French Hill, and we was sure first on the ground. We went to Dawson and gave a lawyer $100 to apply for the claim for us. They told him that we must have a survey before they would give the grant. Well, we gave a surveyor $200 to survey the claim for us, and we went out there with him. When we got there with the surveyor, we found a dozen fellows with rockers taking the rich pay off the rim rock. It was 3 weeks before we got our grant. The Gold Commissioner's gang took $30,000 out of it, and now we have the leavings, not worth much. If we hadn't thought of getting the lawyer, we wouldn't have even got the leavings." That was enough for John. He arose and pushed through the bushes on the opposite side of the trail, walking in the general direction of the hilltop. He desired solitude, that he might think. He felt fiercely angry at these wrongs. They were intolerable. They struck at the simplest principles of human liberty. Here were men enduring privations which sometimes caused permanent bodily harm. John remembered the snow-blinded traveller of Cape Le Berge, only to have the fruits of their strenuous endeavour mercilessly taken from them. Before he could control his indignation, he had wandered miles from Dawson and gained the summit of the hill, where he sat to eat his luncheon. To the eastward was the valley of the great gold-bearing creek, Bonanza. He noted the great rounded ridges, which, with their intervening valleys, ran along the slopes to its bottom. He marvelled at the softness and beauty of their lines, each of which ended in a gracefully rounded head, standing sentinel over the creek. And well they might appear to guard its riches, for those heads contained immense deposits of bench gravels that were to cause extraordinary sensation in the days to come. Finishing his lunch, he was idly working at the moss with his heels when he noticed that the rock beneath was white as milk. He examined it closely. Yes, it was quartz, the parent rock of gold. Immediately the instinct of the miner was aroused. He took a piece of loose rock and easily broke off several pieces. These he put into his pockets and set out eagerly for home. His mind was free of politics now. A tinge of palest green was on the hills. This one day's sun had burst a myriad of buds upon a million poplars. Yes, it was summer! George and Hugh, coming in soon after John's return, were shown the find, and all was enthusiasm. "Pretty hungry-looking stuff," was Hugh's comment on close inspection. "How will you get water up there for your stamp mill?" John found an answer, as he remembered the long, gently reclining ridge to Bonanza Creek with its flanking valleys on either side. "I'll take my ore to Bonanza Creek." "But they won't let you take the water out of Bonanza Creek." "Perhaps not, but they will let me have the water out of the tributaries, if I can turn it back before it reaches Bonanza Creek." On the morrow George and he visited the famous, or infamous, seat of the head over the mining industry. They found the Gold Commissioner's office a log building of no great dimensions near the police barracks. A waiting crowd was lined before the door. A policeman standing near the office entrance directed John, who wished merely to get a copy of the regulations governing the taking up of quartz claims, to ask at the wicket inside. He entered. As he stood waiting his turn, he overheard a miner, evidently a Scandinavian, applying for a claim. "This claim is already applied for," said the official. "But, mister, there was not a stake on it when I staked it." "I don't care. It is applied for. Next." "Can't I see the commissioner?" "No, he's busy. Next." "Say, mister, this is my claim. Next." Poor Ole was shoved aside by the crowd. He had waited through the weary night to gain a hearing, and now ethereal castles came toppling down. As soon as John had obtained a copy of the regulations, he and George Bruce set off to the Hill of Promise, each to take up a quartz claim. They staked their claims, and then followed the ridge down to Bonanza Creek. They found that the rounded edge of the ridge overlooking the creek was admirably suited as the site of a quartz mill. "George," said his companion, "I don't think my right will be of any other use to me. I shall take up a claim here under the placer laws, and I think you had better do the same." So each of them staked a placer claim. Instead of returning by the way they had come, the inclination to return by the creek trail was too strong to be resisted. They would be forced to wade through numerous bog holes, but what of that? Down the hill they scrambled, and came to a sudden halt amid the full activity of some mining operations. A gang of men were working over a line of sluice boxes, with a big fellow standing on a pile of rocks superintending. The water was shut off from running through the sluices. The men had lifted the riffles out of the dump box, and the gleam of nuggets and dust was plainly visible. "It looks good." "It ought to be, after 3 days shovelling in on discovery," answered the superintendent, who flashed a keen glance at the newcomers. "Is this discovery?" "That's what I endeavoured to enunciate." "Do you object to our watching the clean up?" "Not that I knows of. I suppose the gold ain't going to evaporate 'cause you look at it. But where do you come from? Are you miners?" "We are." "Do you want a job? Give you $10 and board." "No, we have just staked claims, quartz claims on the ridge up there, and intend working them." "Quartz? This country is full of quartz. There ain't nothing in it. See all the quartz in the wash here?" And the foreman pointed to the white pebbles among the rocks on which he was standing. "You can crack these all day and never find a colour." "Where does the gold come from if it does not come from the quartz?" "Where does it come from? It just grows, I guess. Gold is like potatoes in this country. It was over there, just under the bluff, that Carmack made discovery. He found a bunch of high grade pay in the creek bottom and worked it out. And then he had to go 20 feet through the muck to bedrock before he got the real thing. Now, how did the gold get on top of the muck where Carmack first found it? There has not been a good sized colour found above bedrock on any other claim on the creek. I tell you, if you try to figure where gold in this country comes from, you'll go bughouse before you find out. Gold is where you find it. It's a blooming conundrum. Take me, I came up here and could have staked in on El Dorado. Well, I couldn't find a colour in the creek. But what I could see was a sign stuck up reading, 'This creek is reserved for Swedes and moose.' Now, I weren't a Swede, and I sure weren't a moose, so I passes her up. What happens? Why, a lot of fools take her up, and she's the richest ground in the country. Nice, ain't it? And me working for wages." "Well, how do you know I won't strike it rich on my quartz claim?" "You may, stranger, you may. I've given up calling people fools for having different notions from me. Hope you will." They found the trail as bad as it had been described to them. It did indeed make the Slough of Despond look like the rocky road to Dublin. Few men they met but had some humorous remark to make, and there was probably no toil greater than wading with pack on back from stump to stone, from stone to stump, in the course of that desperate journey. Humour was the saving grace. It was an effective barrier against despair. Occasionally men were met, blaspheming, cursing the land, the gold, the government, but generally it was humour which made the path passable. A led horse waded into a bog hole. He stopped and seemed to hesitate. "Throw a stick at him," shouted the man leading him to another who walked behind. A stick was thrown. The horse plunged, and the bog being deeper than the men had imagined, was more in the mire. "Keep him going, it's the only way to save him," was shouted. Stick after stick was hurled at the struggling animal, which became more and more bemired. It gave up the struggle. The report of a rifle soon after told that the horse was dead. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of the Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Kathy Barrett. The Great Gold Rush, A Tale of the Klondike, by W. H. P. Jarvis.
Chapter 19. Graft. John and his fellow prospector were working with hammer and drill on their quartz claims 3 weeks after they had staked them, when Hugh Spencer and Court paid them a first visit. Hugh scrutinized the quartz his friends had mined. "Well, this is poverty rock for sure. Why don't you quit it?" "That's what we've been thinking lately," George confessed. "But what shall we do? Go to work for wages?" "Better earn $10 a day than get nothing here after blowing in your money buying grub and powder. But why not take a chance in the new stampede to Australia Creek that runs into Dominion Creek on the Indian River side of the Divide? That's what we hunted you up for." John and George gazed at one another. Not a word was said. John walked to the tent and began taking it down. 4 packs were made of the camp and the equipment, and the party, well loaded, returned to Dawson. So John passed from a place of many dreams. Hugh had already made his plans. "Australia Creek is already taken up," he said, "and besides, it is too far away. It's 2 days' trip out there, about 60 miles. My idea is to hunt up a creek for ourselves. I hear the grafters in the Gold Commissioner's office already refuse applications, on the grounds that the creek is all applied for. There was some sort of a row in the office when the discoverers came in to record. Things is getting pretty bad when even a discoverer is refused a record." "It's about time for Uncle Sam to come along," chaffed Frank, exploiting once more his set theory. The party reached the home camp, deposited their loads, and passed on into the town to make purchases for their projected trip. As they passed up the main street they saw a crowd collected, yelling itself hoarse. Revolvers were being fired in the air, and a frenzy of passion seemed to govern a number of individuals. A man, wild of eye and with a disordered beard, came running down the street. "Man Dewey has knocked hell out of the Spaniards at Manila!" he shouted. Frank gave a cock crow and was off at a dive into the crowd, where a man standing on a pile of lumber was reading a newspaper. He would read a line, then yell and wave the paper over his head. He would again and again return to the headlines and shout them out. "Biggest sea battle since Trafalgar!" Yells, cheers, revolver shots. "Dewey ranks with Nelson!" More uproar. "Rebels cut the cables, but the Eye Opener gets account by special dispatch boat." When exhaustion had overtaken the first reader, another took his place, till the owner of the newspaper was inspired to claim it and cry, "To the Pioneer Hall, boys, and hear the full account of the biggest sea fight that was ever pulled off. Admission only $1. It is said that the celebration of Admiral Dewey's victory at Manila caused the dogs in Dawson, numbering many thousands, to leave for the hills and stay there for the space of 3 days. Having bought the supplies, the next problem before the companions was to find Frank. They entered the Borealis. He was not there. Hugh suggested that his 2 companions should wait in the saloon while he sought the truant in other places of revelry. They remained, glad to sit, watch and smoke in the shaded comfort of a curtained recess. Presently a man of giant, heavy figure, with face coarse and brutal in every line, stalked into the motley crowd. His massive forehead suggested a power of brain, while his lower face showed the lines of a masterful spirit. A part of his left ear was missing, and from the size and shape of the cut one could readily believe the popular legend that this disfigurement had been gained in a camp brawl, and was caused by another man's teeth. To complete this awesome personality there was a cast in one eye. A whisper went through the crowd. "Pooh-Bah!" This, then, was the Prince of Grafters, the all-powerful of that region. As Poo-Bah walked towards the dancers every eye was on him, and if any face denoted anything save disgust and loathing, it was fear. A girl slid up to him and said, in a tone of confident familiarity, "Hello, Poo-Bah! How's my baby tonight?" "I told you not to call me that," he answered fiercely. "What baby?" "No, Poo-Bah." "That's what they call you," she said with a strange affectation of simplicity. "Well, they won't make friends with me by doing so," he boomed, "and I'm a pretty good friend to have." "Ain't you going to buy the wine?" "I suppose so, but ain't you got that thirst of yours wet up yet?" "I've got to live." Just then Poo-Bah and the girl, popularly known as Round Eyes, were joined by 2 men. One was a strong, big fellow with a bronzed face, who had been a master mariner. The other was Hardman, the record clerk of the Gold Commissioner's office, evil-looking and a weakling. His small black eyes were watery.
"Hello, fellows. The lady has suggested wine. Will you help us clean up a bottle or two?" "Sure thing," replied the Cap. Hardman was glad to agree. His eyes were watching the face of his lord, with the same expression as shines in the eyes of a hungry cur watching his master feast. Both the Cap and he had tales of woe to tell. Their troubles lay sore upon them. The party entered the booth against which John and George were sitting. As they entered and seated themselves, the two friends could hear their voices through the hangings. At first there was nothing in the words they spoke that their brazen natures would not have willingly advanced to all the world, at least to all Dawson's world, but later the wine made them forget. They had not realized that the wall of their compartment was only a blanket. "2 bottles of wine," Poo Bah demanded. The waiter brought the bottles and glasses, and Poo Bah signed the "tab." "Now you pay that tab or I don't get no percentage," said the girl. "Suppose I don't pay," answered he. "You know these damn fools from the creeks will buy all kinds of wine just to have the honour of drinking with my girl. Ain't that right?" "I guess it is," he answered with a cold, unpleasant laugh. "Because men are fools makes life easy for you and me. Ain't that right?" "Look here, I've got a kick coming," said the mariner, thumping his knee with a fist like mahogany. "What's the matter, Cap?" "I wrote the doctor to get me appointed as collector of royalty." "You did sure, and I backed you up; but I heard you got your appointment in the mail that got in to day." "Sure thing I did." "Well, what are you growling about? You don't want to be told how to make $1 or 2 on a job like that." "It's going all wrong." "What's the trouble?" "I went down to see Smoothbore" Smoothbore was the nickname of the head of the police, "and told him I had orders for him to put me on collecting. I guess I may have looked a little bit as if I thought I owned the earth. But I sure reckoned myself on Easy Street as soon as I got collecting. Well, Smoothbore, he sizes me up a bit. I guess he kind of felt I knew how to take a few ounces out of a poke and make up the weight in black sand, and then he says, 'I guess I'll send you to Thistle Creek.' Thistle Creek, hell! They won't clean up $100 in that creek this summer, and if you'll show me how I can work a graft there I'll be obliged. Anyhow, $250 a month will keep you going till something better turns up." $250 a month ain't even a flea bite, seeing what it costs to live like a gentleman in Dawson. You can't eat under $10 a day." His voice faded in a growl. Poo Bah took up the running. "The thing is, we've got to get Smoothbore relieved from command here. He puts backbone even into Hi U Bill." Hi U Bill was the district commissioner. "We've got to get a putty man." The others agreed cordially. John and his companion, who had before felt like going, looked at each other and silently decided to stay. "What kick have you got, Hardy?" they heard Poo Bah ask. "Kick!" whined the little man. "I've got lots of kick. We had a row in the office to day." "I heard something of that. What was the row?" "Some Australians came in." John and George looked at each other and grimly smiled. "I sized it up that they had staked something rich. I tried to tell them that the creek they wanted to record on was all taken up, intending, of course, to put you in on discovery." "Yes, yes." "Well, the Cockneys just pulled 5 guns and said, 'Record those claims.' I made a break as if to get the books, intending to get out the back door, but the old man comes out of his office and catches on. He turns white around the gills and says, 'Record those claims.' Of course, I just had to give record." "But where does Smoothbore come in?" "He comes in all right. I'm just from him now. I went down after supper to see him to find out if an example could not be made of the Cockneys, thinking if we got them on the wood pile we would have a chance at their claims after all. He was alone, walking up and down the mess. 'Sit down,' he says, and I sits. 'What is it?' I had to tell him the story straight. You see, he is a hard man to lie to, and I knew he already had the story. After I got down to telling him of the old man ordering me to record the claims, he says, 'And you recorded them?' 'Yes,' says I. 'The men did not ask you for any money?' 'No.' 'In fact, they only desired to assist your memory to the point that you had never before recorded the claims they asked for?' 'I guess so,' says I. 'This is what you must say if you give evidence against them.' And then I thinks a bit and I says, 'You couldn't give them 24 hours to get out of the country, could you?' 'No,' says he. 'If I do anything I arrest them and bring them to trial, which I will do as soon as you swear out information.' 'I guess I won't do that,' I says. 'Now look here, Oh, all right. Smoothbore ain't with us. He's against us, and it's up to you to get him fired." Hardman had ended his long speech. "It might not be easy," said the heavy man thoughtfully. "Yes, it will. Laurier will do anything our boss says these days. You fix it." "That's right," the Cap put in. "Hardy's right again." "You'd be a long time in Nova Scotia before you'd earn $250 a month, eh, Cap?" sneered the girl. Earn? How much do you earn here? You graft same as the rest of us." "Quit fighting," Poo Bah broke in, and their querulous voices ceased. "Cap, I think I see how you can make $1 or 2, and you'll be near our friend Hardy here. Besides being in a position to pick up information for the benefit of yours truly. I'll see the Gold Commissioner and get you put on as special doorkeeper instead of a policeman. Guess your dignity will stand up under this. You'll have the right to let fellows into the office on special appointment, see? Which will cost a 10 or a 20. "Not so bad," slowly muttered the Cap, while the girl gurgled her appreciation. "The thing looks to have possibilities, and I guess my dignity will stand it." Just then Hugh, with Frank at his heels, came in. "Wait till I have just one dance," cried Frank, and was off to the room where music was to be heard. John motioned to Hugh to be still. They listened eagerly. "Now, I've got some news. Blamed noise those people make. Came in the mail to day," went on Poo Bah. "Orders have come from Ottawa throwing open the hillside claims of Dominion. I won't mind you fellows getting a claim or 2, but I want to get a bunch." "You'll get hold of yours before the news is made public," suggested the Cap. "No, that won't hardly do," drawled Poo Bah. "You see, there'll be hell enough raised when it is found I get a bunch of claims; and while Ottawa is ready enough to take our explanation of things, there is such a thing as being too coarse, even here. Besides, it ain't necessary. No, in a few days the news will be made public. Till then, keep your head shut, see?" "We'll trust you to work the graft," said the girl. "You can certainly rely on me. Now, people, I've got to pull my freight." Hugh gripped John's arm, but he released it as he saw the party were leaving the box. The friends shrank back further into the shadows. When they were gone he whispered, "Did you hear that? Dominion hillsides to be thrown open, some of the richest ground in the country." "I heard them talking about grafts, and I heard complaints about Smoothbore, whoever that may be." "The Colonel at the barracks." "They appear to find him in the way." John hurriedly gave some account of what they had overheard. Hugh's eyes glistened. "Sure thing, Smoothbore is in the way. He's straight, but this last about Dominion is the news. We'll get in on the hillsides of Dominion and do our best to hold them." It was late enough for rest, especially for weary workers such as they, so they passed through the streets directly for the home camp. Dawson was now the home of 20,000 people, 99% adult males. Its streets were a wide range of strange sights and wild scenes. Its outskirts were of tents, and yet more tents. They went to bed with the waking dreams of wealth very close to them. John Berwick, who had some qualms at taking advantage of what he had overheard, felt it was an unsatisfactory condition of things in which such a malefactor as Poo Bah could swagger and flourish. Chapter 20.